The biting wind whipped strands of silver blonde hair across Aurora's face as she stood sentinel on the precipice of Whisper Ridge. Below, the dense, ancient forest sprawled like a dark green sea, bisected by the shimmering ribbon of the swift river, the unforgiving border between her pack, the Mooncrest, and their sworn enemies, the Shadow Ridge Pack. For generations, this river hadn't just divided territory, it had run red with the blood of their kin. A crimson epitaph written into the very currents. The elders whispered of the first blood flood, nearly a century past, when a territorial dispute over sacred hunting grounds escalated into a brutal skirmish that left dozens dead on both banks, staining the water for days and cementing a hatred that time had only deepened, poisoning the very soul of the forest. The memory was a raw wound, perpetually kept open by skirmishes and losses on both sides. A constant, aching reminder, carved not just on stones but on the hearts of the living. Only a moon cycle ago, Aurora had participated in the rites of the ascending moon, a solemn ceremony for young warriors transitioning into full protector roles. Standing veiled in moonlight beside the elders in the Chamber of Echoes, she had recited the ancient oaths, her voice echoing amidst the silent granite monuments to the fallen. She felt the crushing weight of expectation settle upon her then, heavier than ever before, as Elder Alara, Riss's grieving aunt and a revered storyteller, recounted the tales of past Mooncrest heroes, wolves who sacrificed everything to defend their lands, their traditions, their very identity against the shadow blight across the river. Alara's narrative painted the Shadow Ridge as inherently cruel, driven by a primal darkness, subtly reinforcing the ingrained hatred even as she spoke of sacrifice and resilience. Aurora had felt the familiar fire of righteous anger, mixed with a gnawing anxiety about the future she was destined to lead. A future seemingly chained to this unending conflict. Aurora adjusted the worn leather bracers on her forearms, the familiar weight a small comfort against the chill, and the ever-present tension that seemed to seep from the river stones themselves. Her knuckles were white as she instinctively gripped the hilt of the hunting knife strapped to her thigh, its bone handle worn smooth by her grasp and that of her mother before her, a tangible link to the lineage of duty she carried. She wasn't just any warrior, she was Luna in waiting, daughter of Alpha Declan, trained since childhood not just to fight, but to lead, to protect, to embody the resilience of the Mooncrest. Her mother, Lyra's older sister Serena, had been a fierce warrior and compassionate Luna before succumbing to the Moonbane fever years ago, leaving a legacy Aurora felt keenly pressured to uphold. The weight of expectation, the echoes of her mother's quiet strength, and her father's weary leadership settled on her shoulders like a physical cloak, heavier some days than others. Her wolf, a creature of moonlight silver fur and fierce loyalty, stirred restlessly beneath her skin, tasting the animosity that saturated the very air along the border. Its senses, sharper than her human ones, picked up the faint, discordant notes of fear and aggression from patrols on both sides, a constant, low-level hum of potential violence. Every rustle of leaves in the canopy above, every distant snap of a twig from the shadowed depths below, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. Vigilance was survival, a lesson etched onto her soul as surely as the faint scars that mapped her body, legacies of clashes both large and small. The Mooncrest Den, nestled behind a cascading waterfall miles back from the treacherous border, was a sanctuary carved deep into the mountainside. A network of warm, defensible caves glowed with the soft, ethereal light of phosphorescent moss cultivated meticulously by the pack healers over generations. The air within hummed with the lifeblood of the pack, the comforting scent of roasting meat from the communal hearth, the pungent aroma of drying herbs in the healer's alcove, headed by the sharp-tongued elder Maeve, the familiar damp fur of returning patrols, and the underlying musk of hundreds of wolves living in close, intricate community, smooth, curving tunnels, worn by countless paws, led to communal gathering spaces adorned with ancient pack carvings depicting hunts, heroes, and celestial charts tracking the moon goddess's favor. Private family hollows offering moments of quiet intimacy. The healer's infirmary fragrant with poultices and tinctures, and the solemn chamber of echoes. Here, memorial stones stood sentinel, cool granite monuments to loss. Each stone bore the names of the fallen, meticulously carved by grieving kin, a stark, enduring reminder of the staggering cost of the endless war. Touching the cool granite, tracing the familiar names, Uncle Vorian, lost in the Battle of Crimson Ford, Cousin Lyra, ambushed on patrol 3 winters ago, her childhood friend Reese, whose bright, mischievous laughter still echoed faintly in her memory, silenced too soon in a skirmish over contested fishing rights just last summer, always reignited the embers of grief and righteous anger within her. The chamber was both a source of strength, reminding her what she fought for, and a heavy burden, a testament to the failures of peace, a physical manifestation of inherited hate. In stark contrast, Shadow Ridge territory, as depicted in Mooncrest lore and scout reports, often embellished with fear and prejudice, was said to be harsher, their den a network of jagged, deeper caverns within the formidable Blackfang Mountain, marked by sharp angles and echoing shadows that seemed to swallow the light. Mooncrest tradition held that the very rock of Blackfang Mountain was cursed, imbued with a primal instability that seeped into the wolves who dwelled there. Their traditions were rumored to be more brutal, focused solely on strength and dominance. Their leadership earned through violent challenge rather than hereditary succession or council approval. Mooncrest tales painted their memorial rituals, if they had any, as less about remembrance and more about fueling vengeance. Oaths sworn over fresh blood rather than carved stone. Grotesque ceremonies held in echoing chambers deep beneath the mountain where the darkness itself was said to witness their vows. While Aurora suspected some of this was biased propaganda, the palpable hostility radiating from their patrols offered little counter-evidence. They valued brute force, cunning born of desperation, and absolute loyalty to their alpha, discarding perceived weakness, be it age, injury, or dissent, with callous pragmatism. The war with the Shadow Ridge wolves was older than the tallest oaks in the forest. Its roots sunk deep into poisoned soil, tangled beyond easy unraveling. Its origins were shrouded in conflicting narratives of betrayal, disputed lands, and blood spilled under contested moons. Mooncrest history spoke vividly of a broken alliance 40 years ago, during the time of encroaching human logging operations that threatened both packs. The Shadow Ridge Alpha of that time, a notoriously volatile and ambitious wolf named Malachor, had allegedly reneged on a solemn pact sealed under the Unity Moon to jointly defend their ancestral lands. Instead, according to Mooncrest accounts, Malachor used the chaos of human incursions to seize the fertile Sunstone Valley, a vital hunting ground necessary for surviving the harsh mountain winters, brutally murdering the Mooncrest envoys, including Kaelin's elder brother Aaron, sent to negotiate a truce and reaffirm the alliance. Aaron's death was particularly brutal, his body left displayed at the border as a grim warning, forever scarring Kaelin. That betrayal led directly to the Battle of Crimson Ford, a horrific clash where the Swift River first truly earned its bloody reputation under Kaelin's then new, grief-stricken leadership. The specific grievances had perhaps blurred with the relentless passage of time, lost in the fog of repeated skirmishes, ambushes, and retaliations. But the hatred was meticulously passed down, nurtured like a venomous vine through stories told to pups nestled in warm dens and oaths sworn by warriors under the cold moon. Shadow Ridge wolves were consistently portrayed as brutal, honorless savages, ruled now by an alpha known primarily for his ruthless efficiency and unwavering grip on power, Declan. His name was a curse on Mooncrest lips, a bogeyman invoked to frighten unruly pups into obedience, a living symbol of the darkness that perpetually threatened their borders. Stories circulated, often exaggerated, Aurora suspected, but rooted in some grim reality of his brutal consolidation of power following the sudden, mysterious death of his own father, Grok, Malakor's successor. Shadow Ridge claimed it was a hunting accident, a tragic fall in the treacherous mountain paths near the sheer ice needle peaks. Mooncrest whispers, fueled by fear and enmity, insisted Declan had challenged and killed his own sire in a ruthless bid for the alpha position, silencing all dissent through fear and force, consolidating his power swiftly and without mercy. Whatever the truth, his cold efficiency in battle and his unwavering demand for absolute loyalty were undisputed. Aurora bore physical testament to the cost of his reign. She had lost uncles, cousins, childhood friends like Reese to Shadow Ridge claws, and teeth during border clashes under his command. The scars on her own body, faint silver lines against her tanned skin, one jagged line along her ribs from a near-fatal ambush during a blizzard 3 winters ago, when her patrol was caught unprepared. Another tracing the curve of her shoulder from a bitter skirmish over contested fishing rights just last spring. A fight Torvin had barely survived, were constant, aching reminders of this endless cycle of violence and loss. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, trying to center herself. The familiar sense of pine needles crushed underfoot, damp earth releasing its loamy perfume after a recent rain, and the reassuring presence of her own packmates patrolling nearby, steady Fenrir, a veteran warrior whose quiet competence she relied upon. Covering the eastern flank, Ilara, Lyra's younger sister, now a fierce warrior in her own right, guarding the southern approach, filled her senses. A grounding anchor in the swirling tension. Ilara, especially, represented both the continuity of their pack and the weight of their losses. She had struggled deeply after Lyra's death, channeling her grief into ferocious dedication, pushing herself harder than anyone. Aurora saw so much of Lyra's fire in her, tempered now with a quiet thoughtfulness that hinted at a generation wearying of inherited hate, occasionally voicing quiet doubts about the necessity of constant vigilance that bordered on provocation. But beneath it all, carried on the shifting wind currents that swirled up from the river valley like phantom whispers, was the faint, acrid tang of the enemy. It was a scent that always made her wolf snarl silently deep within her chest, her hackles prickle with instinctual animosity. It smelled of cold stone, iron like dominance, and something wilder, harsher, less predictable than their own forest. Today, however, there was something else mingling with it, something unfamiliar yet disturbably resonant, pulling at her senses in a way simple hostility never had. A scent, like ozone, before a violent thunderstorm, and ancient, undisturbed forests where sunlight rarely touched the floor. Wild and utterly untamed, raw primal power made manifest, yet underscored by a note of something deep and compelling, magnetic. Like the undeniable pull of the full moon on the tides, it unsettled her profoundly, penetrating her carefully constructed defenses, bypassing learned hatred, stirring forgotten instincts. It made her wolf whine low in her chest, a confusing, discordant symphony of aggression and something else, something primal, insistent, that she couldn't or wouldn't name. It coiled in her gut, a strange, unwelcome mix of apprehension and an inexplicable, magnetic draw that felt dangerously close to recognition, like a half-remembered dream both terrifying and longed for. A sharp howl echoed from the north, closer than usual, slicing through the relative quiet of the ridge like a thrown knife. Torvin, her second-in-command and childhood friend, they had tumbled together as pups under the watchful eyes of their mothers, trained side by side as eager adolescents pushing their limits, fought back to back as hardened warriors trusting each other implicitly, materialized from the dense undergrowth. His broad shoulders were tense, his expression grim, his sturdy brown fur ruffled by his swift passage through the trees. His loyalty to her, and to Mooncrest, was a bedrock she relied upon. Yet beneath it, she sometimes sensed a deeper, unvoiced feeling, a possessiveness in his watchful gaze that bordered on resentment when she made independent decisions. A trait she purposefully ignored. Her duty was to the pack. Her focus on the future leadership Kaylin was preparing her for, not on personal entanglements that could complicate pack dynamics, especially not with someone whose grief mirrored her own, but seemed calcified into unyielding hatred. He carried the weight of his family's massacre at Shadow Ridge hands during the Sunstone Valley conflict years ago like a shroud, a tragedy that fueled his dedication, but also blinded him to any possibility beyond vengeance, making him fiercely resistant to any deviation from established aggressive protocols. Shadow Ridge Patrol. 3, maybe 4, Torvin reported, his voice clipped, his dark eyes scanning the opposite bank intently, moving fast along their side of the riverbank, heading towards the sunken falls. Bold move. Getting that close. Smells like provocation. Aurora nodded, instantly shedding the strange disquiet, compartmentalizing the unsettling scent and the confusing pull. This was familiar territory. Duty surged to the forefront, a welcome clarity amidst the internal chaos. They're testing us again, trying to provoke a reaction, claim we broke the fragile truce. The truce was a flimsy thing, barely papering over the deep cracks of generations of hate, established only after the last bloody battle near Stonefang Pass decimated warrior ranks on both sides 2 summers ago, leaving them weakened but no less hateful. It forbade crossing the river's center current and strictly limited patrol proximity in contested border zones like the falls, where resources like fish and certain herbs were abundant. Alert Fenrir and Alara. We meet them at the falls. Show of force. Unified front. 5 of us should be enough. No engagement unless they cross the center current. Make them see Mooncrest stand strong and united. Her voice was crisp, authoritative. The voice of the Luna she was born to be. Understood. Luna, Torvin said, his gaze lingering on her for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. A flicker of that protective possessiveness, momentarily shadowing his grim determination, before he nodded curtly. He turned, relaying the orders with swift efficiency via short, coded howls before falling into step beside her. They moved swiftly and silently through the trees, a coordinated unit of lethal grace honed by years of practice and shared battles. 5 Mooncrest warriors now, including Aurora, Torvin, Ilara, Fenrir, and the younger but swift Kale, whose older brother died at Stonefang Pass, converging towards the falls like ghosts in the dappled sunlight filtering through the ancient canopy. Aurora's senses sharpened, the world transforming into a vibrant tapestry of sound and smell. She could hear the frantic thump, thump of a rabbit, hidden in its burrow, 50 yards away. Smell the disturbed earth and crushed ferns where the Shadow Ridge Patrol had passed minutes earlier. Even pinpoint the faint scent of anxiety emanating from young Kyle on his first major border confrontation since his brother's death. And that other scent, the unsettling, compelling one she'd detected on the ridge. It grew stronger, more potent, as they neared the falls, weaving itself insistently through the familiar smells of the forest, pulling at her, demanding her attention even as she focused intently on the potential threat ahead. It felt like a low hum beneath her skin, a resonant frequency tuning itself to something deep, ancient, and utterly terrifying within her. A song her very soul strained to hear against its will. They reached the sunken falls, a place where the swift river narrowed dramatically and cascaded over a series of moss-slicked, jagged black rocks into a deep, churning pool below. Mist rose from the turbulent water like spectral dancers, clinging to the drooping ferns and ancient, gnarled roots that lined the steep banks, muffling sound and creating an ethereal, tense atmosphere perfect for ambushes and misunderstandings, a place already stained by the blood of minor skirmishes over the years. Through the shifting haze, she saw them. 4 large wolves, their pelts ranging from dark charcoal gray to deep, earthy russet, stood poised on the opposite bank, mere yards away across the rushing water. They were tense, alert, radiating waves of disciplined hostility across the narrow gap. Standard border posture, ready for violence at the slightest provocation. But it wasn't the sight of the familiar patrol itself that made Aurora's breath catch sharply in her throat. Her heart slammed against her ribs as if trying to escape its cage, the world narrowing to a pinprick of horrified focus. It was the 5th wolf, standing slightly apart from the others, positioned strategically on a slightly higher rocky outcrop overlooking the scene, significantly larger, broader shouldered, his presence dominating the space around him as if the very air bowed to his will. His fur was the color of midnight shadows, utterly black, save for a faint, distinguished dusting of silver at his powerful muzzle and temples that spoke of maturity and hard-won command, not advanced age. His eyes, even from across the churning water and through the swirling mist, they seemed to burn with an unnatural, piercing intensity, amber, like trapped firelight in the gloom, holding depths of power and chilling intelligence. He was undeniably powerful, an aura of absolute, unquestionable command rolling off him in palpable waves, silencing the very air around him, making even the rushing water seem momentarily quieter. Alpha, unmistakably Alpha Declan, and the scent rolling off him in potent, undeniable waves, was the one that had haunted her senses on the ridge. Thunderstorms and ancient forests, raw, untamed power and deep, hidden earth, danger and magnetism intertwined. It slammed into her, bypassing thought, bypassing ingrained hatred, bypassing generations of animosity and loss, bypassing the memory of Reese and Lyra and Vorian and Aran, and struck something ancient and primal deep within the core of her soul, igniting a wildfire she couldn't control. Her wolf surged forward against her mental barriers, a frantic, desperate recognition clawing at her insides, howling a truth she didn't want to hear, couldn't possibly accept, a truth delivered by the oldest magic, the core of their very being, mate. The word exploded in her mind, not as a conscious thought, but as an undeniable, soul-shattering truth delivered by the ancient magic that bound their kind, the inexplicable, often cruel will of the moon goddess herself. Horror, cold and absolute, crashed over her, stealing the air from her lungs, making the world tilt precariously. No, 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 it couldn't be. Not him. Not the butcher of Shadow Ridge. Not the ruthless Alpha, whose name was synonymous with death and sorrow for her people. The wolf, whose assumed policies had led directly to the ambush that killed Lyra. The skirmish that silenced Reese forever. Not the male responsible, directly or indirectly, for the deaths of so many of her kin, whose names were etched onto the memorial stones she touched each day, whose ghosts seemed to whisper accusations from the mist-laden rocks. Not Alpha Declan. Across the mist-shrouded falls, the massive black wolf stiffened as if struck by lightning. His head snapped towards her, those burning amber eyes locking onto hers with shocking, terrifying immediacy. Aurora saw the jolt of profound surprise ripple through his powerful frame, saw the dawning recognition mirror her own horrified disbelief in his intense gaze. For a fleeting, unguarded instant, beneath the iron control of the Alpha, she saw something else: confusion, vulnerability, perhaps even despair, before it was ruthlessly slammed down. In that instant, the world narrowed to the impossibly small space between them. The roaring falls faded to a dull hum, the bristling hostility of their respective patrols momentarily forgotten, utterly overshadowed by the cataclysmic, magnetic force of the mate bond clicking irrevocably, brutally, into place. He was Alpha Declan. He was the sworn enemy of her pack, the monster of their darkest tales, the embodiment of everything she was sworn to fight, the leader of the pack that had caused her people unbearable pain. And he was her mate, the moon goddess, weaver of fates and bringer of curses, had indeed played a cruel, unthinkable jest. The world tilted violently, threatening to send Aurora spiraling into the abyss of the churning water. Below, the roar of the falls suddenly deafening again as reality crashed back in with the force of a physical blow. Her mind screamed denial, a frantic, desperate litany rejecting the irrefutable truth her soul and her wolf proclaimed with agonizing certainty. No, no, this is wrong. A curse. A dark magic trick wielded by the enemy to break me. A cruel jest of fate designed to shatter my pack. He was the embodiment of everything she fought against, everything she despised, the architect of her people's suffering, the shadow lurking hungrily at their borders, the monster from the dark woods whose name was used to silence crying pups and steel warriors' resolve. How could the moon goddess, the weaver of destinies, the patron deity they prayed to for guidance and protection, bind her, Luna in waiting of Mooncrest, sworn protector of her people, to him? It felt like the ultimate betrayal, not by Declan, but by the very cosmic forces she revered. A shattering blow to her faith. The whispers from the rites of the ascending moon. Alara's tales of pure heroes and irredeemable enemies seemed like hollow mockery now. Her warriors, Torvin and the others, instantly sensed the sudden, drastic shift in the atmosphere. The air between Aurora and the enemy Alpha crackled with an almost unbearable charge, a volatile energy that transcended mere pack animosity. It felt raw, primal, dangerous, like lightning about to strike. They bristled, low growls rumbling deep in their chests, unsure of the source but reacting instinctively to their Luna's visible distress, the slight tremor in her hands, the sudden paleness beneath her tan, and the palpable intensity radiating from the imposing black Alpha across the water. Torvin stepped closer to Aurora, instinctively shielding her slightly, his eyes fixed with burning suspicion, intensified by his underlying possessiveness. On Declan. "Luna, are you all right? What's wrong?" His voice was tight, laced with sharp concern and utter confusion. He felt the shift, the dangerous energy, but couldn't fathom its cause, attributing it solely to Declan's intimidating presence or perhaps some unseen dark magic he believed Shadow Ridge wielded. Aurora couldn't answer, couldn't tear her gaze away. She felt frozen, trapped in the burning amber gaze of the black wolf across the water, a gaze that seemed to sear her very soul. She saw the conflict warring within him too, the initial, profound shock giving way to a flare of fierce, primal possessiveness that lit his eyes for a terrifying, consuming instant, instantly followed by a flicker of something akin to her own despair. Quickly masked beneath layers of impenetrable alpha control, he was Alpha. He understood the political and personal implications perhaps even better than she did in that first shattering moment. A mate from an enemy pack, the Luna in waiting no less. It was unthinkable, a strategic disaster of epic proportions, a potential weakness neither of them, nor their fractured packs, could possibly afford. It threatened the very foundations of their deeply divided world, potentially igniting the very war they were both, perhaps, in their own brutal ways, trying to manage, or at least contain within survivable limits. Declan took a hesitant, almost involuntary step towards the riverbank, his powerful wolf form radiating a confusing mixture of command and profound uncertainty. The movement was slight, almost imperceptible, but loaded with unspoken weight, a magnetic pull drawing him closer against all logic and ingrained hostility, an instinct overriding generations of hate. The other Shadow Ridge wolves watched him, utterly bewildered by their usually implacable alpha's strange, almost vulnerable reaction, their ears twitching, sensing the profound shift but not understanding its earth-shattering cause. They exchanged uneasy, nervous glances, their own aggression momentarily forgotten in their confusion and apprehension regarding their leader's bizarre behavior. 1. A rugged wolf with a scarred muzzle who seemed older, perhaps his beta, gave a low questioning whine. The spell broke, shattered by a surge of revulsion and white-hot fury that ripped through Aurora, momentarily overriding the bond's insidious, magnetic pull. This connection wasn't destiny, it was a mockery, a grotesque betrayal of her blood, her pack, her fallen kin, whose names were carved on the memorial stones, whose ghosts seemed to whisper accusations from the mist. Reese! Lyra! Arn! Their faces flashed before her eyes. This bond was an insult to their memory, to the sacrifices made generation after generation, fighting his kind. She threw back her head, feeling the agony of denial warring with the primal urge of the shift. The transformation overtook her in a wave of controlled agony and desperate, furious release. Bones cracked and reformed with sickening speed, muscles bunched and stretched beneath her skin. A primal scream trapped within the transformation, a silent howl against this abhorrent fate. Moonlight silver fur erupted across her transforming limbs. Her senses exploded into hypersensitivity, the scent of Declan mate becoming almost unbearably potent, a nauseating, impossible blend of fierce, unwanted attraction and deep-seated, righteous repulsion. It felt like poison ivy wrapped around a lifeline. She landed silently on 4 paws, her silver wolf form larger than most females. Lean muscle coiled like powerful springs beneath her shimmering pelt, radiating defiance and raw, untamed fury. Her eyes, now the luminous silver blue of her wolf form, blazing with rejection, met Declan's burning amber gaze across the falls. This time, there was no shock mirroring his, only pure, undiluted hostility. A vicious snarl ripped from her throat, echoing off the damp rocks. A clear challenge, a visceral rejection of the bond, of him, of this catastrophic destiny. I deny you. I reject this curse. I will never accept this. The message was carried on the savage sound waves, raw and absolute. Declan flinched. Not physically, his massive form remained imposing, rooted to the spot, but Aurora saw it in the sudden tightening of his powerful shoulders, the infinitesimal flicker of raw pain, of sharp rejection, deep within those intense eyes before it was immediately suppressed, replaced by a mask of cold alpha indifference, a shield slamming down hard. He didn't shift, perhaps recognizing, even in his own profound shock, that mirroring her transformation would only escalate the situation beyond any hope of immediate control, likely igniting a bloody battle neither side could afford right now, especially with his own patrol clearly confused and unsettled by his reaction. He gave a low, guttural command to his patrol, a sharp bark that cut through the lingering tension like a whip crack. They hesitated, glancing nervously from their stunned Alpha to the snarling silver Luna and her bristling warriors, before reluctantly melting back into the shadows of their own territory, confusion and unease evident in their backward glances. The scarred Beta gave Declan one last, searching look before obeying. Declan held her gaze for one long, charged moment longer. There was no overt threat in his stance now, only a profound, unsettling stillness that promised future complications. A shared burden neither could escape, an unwelcome intimacy forged in mutual horror. Then, with a barely perceptible inclination of his head, not submission, not quite acknowledgement, perhaps simply recognition of the impossible chasm now separating them, he turned and vanished into the dense, shadowed forest of Shadow Ridge, leaving Aurora trembling violently, not from fear of battle, but from the sheer, world-altering force of the revelation and the violent, terrifying conflict raging within her soul. Luna, what happened? Torvin was beside her wolf form instantly as she forced herself to shift back, the reverse process leaving her feeling drained, vulnerable, and raw, the silver fur receding to reveal trembling human limbs unsteady on the slick rocks. His human voice was tight with concern and burning suspicion. You felt different, charged, electric, dangerous. What did he do to you? Did he use some dark magic? His hand hovered near her arm, protective, possessive, his suspicion clearly latching onto the idea of Shadow Ridge witchcraft. Aurora pulled her tunic straight, avoiding his searching gaze, forcing her hands to still, burying the tremor deep inside her core. Nothing. The Alpha was unsettling. It was a gross understatement, a lie that felt like ashes on her tongue, choking her. He's my mate, her wolf whimpered internally, a truth she savagely repressed. Declan. Torvin spat the name like poison, his eyes still scanning the trees where the Shadow Ridge Alpha had disappeared, his hand now gripping the hilt of his own knife. He sensed the air like he owns the entire forest. That arrogance, that sudden intensity from him. What did he want? Just intimidation. Trying to provoke us into crossing the current. He must have used some trick to provoke us, nothing more. Aurora lied again, turning away decisively, pulling the cloak of her Luna authority around her like armor, trying to regain control of herself, of the situation. She couldn't tell him. She couldn't tell anyone. Admitting her destined mate was the enemy Alpha would be tantamount to treason. It would shatter her pack's trust, irrevocably undermine her father's authority, invalidate her position as Luna in waiting, and potentially ignite the very war she was supposed to help prevent. It might even fracture the pack internally, turning loyal warriors against her based on ancient fears and hatred. The secret settled in her chest, heavy and cold as river stone, a suffocating weight stealing her breath. She felt utterly, terrifyingly alone, trapped in a truth too dangerous to share, isolated within her own pack. The patrol back to the Mooncrest den was steeped in a heavy, oppressive silence, fraught with unspoken tension and Torvin's barely concealed suspicion radiating from him like heat off stone. Alara cast worried glances at Aurora, but respected her silence, while Fenrir maintained his stoic watch. Though his brow was furrowed deeper than usual, young Kale seemed relieved the confrontation hadn't escalated, but looked confused by the lingering tension. Aurora moved mechanically, her mind a chaotic whirlwind of horrified thoughts. Mate, Declan, enemy, traitor, curse, murderer of my kin. The words looped endlessly, each one a fresh stab of betrayal, not by him, but by fate itself, by the goddess she thought protected them. How could she lead her pack with this catastrophic truth coiled inside her like a venomous serpent? How could she face her father, Alpha Declan, whose entire life, whose very identity as Alpha, had been defined by this bitter conflict, whose brother had been butchered by Declan's predecessors? The bond pulsed sickeningly beneath her skin, a constant, low, thrumming awareness of the black wolf across the river. It wasn't just a mental connection, it felt sickeningly physical. A low vibration humming in her blood, a subconscious awareness of his general direction, his potent presence. Even now, miles away across the water, she felt a phantom echo of his power, a dark star pulling insistently at her own, a connection she wanted desperately to sever, but intrinsically knew she couldn't. It felt like a chain, binding her to the abyss. Back in the relative safety of the Mooncrest caverns, the usual comforting atmosphere felt suffocating, tainted by her secret. The familiar scent of her pack, normally a balm to her soul, seemed overlaid with the faint, phantom scent of thunderstorms and ancient forest that now seemed to cling stubbornly to her aura, a scent only she, and perhaps Declan, could truly perceive. Yet she feared others might sense something was fundamentally wrong, changed about her. She saw the wariness in some eyes as her patrol returned. Had they sensed the unnatural tension at the falls through Torvin's dark glances or Alara's worried silence? Had Torvin already started whispering his doubts, the unquestioning loyalty in others, like young Alara, whose gaze held only concern, or Fenrir, whose stoicism was unwavering? How many of them would still look at her with respect, with trust, if they knew the impossible truth humming in her veins, binding her to the Alpha, who represented their deepest fears and greatest losses? Her father, Alpha Declan, met her in the central chamber, the heart of the den, his presence a familiar anchor in her swirling confusion. He was aging, his once bright silver hair now heavily streaked with gray, the lines of worry etched deep around his kind but firm eyes. Legacies of decades of leadership, loss, and the constant pressure of war. Yet his presence was still commanding, a pillar of strength for the pack, his scent a comforting mix of authority, pine needles, and paternal warmth. Report, Aurora. His voice was calm, measured, but his gaze was sharp, missing little. Honed by years of reading his warriors and his enemies, she recounted the encounter, carefully, meticulously omitting the soul-altering revelation at the falls, focusing only on the strategic facts, her voice deliberately neutral. Shadow Ridge Patrol, 4 warriors plus Declan himself. They tested the border at the sunken falls, posturing aggressively, but retreated without incident when we showed force and held our ground. No crossing occurred, no engagement necessary. She kept her voice steady, professional, meeting his gaze directly, praying her inner turmoil. The slight tremor she still fought to control wasn't visible. Kalen nodded slowly, rubbing his chin thoughtfully, his gaze distant for a moment, lost in thought. Declan rarely shows himself at simple border patrols unless there's a larger purpose, or unless he seeks to intimidate personally. His presence there is noteworthy, unusual. He paused, studying her face more closely, his experienced eyes narrowing slightly, sensing the subtle dissonance beneath her calm report, the unnatural tension clinging to her. Something feels off. The air near the border feels colder today. Be extra vigilant along the river in the coming days. Double the watches near the falls and Stonefang Pass. He hesitated, then added gently, his voice softening. You seem troubled, daughter, more than the usual border tension warrants. Did something specific happen? Did Declan threaten you? His presence unnerves me. Father, she deflected, forcing a slight shudder, clinging to a partial truth that felt wholly inadequate. He radiates darkness, a palpable hostility, and a connection that terrifies me more than any darkness could, she added silently, the lie bitter on her tongue. He recognized me. Father, and I recognized him as mate. The unspoken word screamed within her, threatening to burst forth. She felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to confess, to seek his guidance. But the fear of the consequences, the political fallout, the look of betrayal in his eyes, the potential chaos within the pack held her captive. Kalen sighed, the sound heavy with the weariness of years, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. The warmth seeped through her tunic, a familiar comfort that now felt strangely inadequate, almost like a betrayal itself, against the chilling secret she harbored. He is a burden we all carry, a shadow cast by our history, by Malakor's treachery and the blood spilled since. But you carry your burdens well, Aurora. Remember your training. Trust your instincts. Lean on your packmates. Rest now. You did well today. Holding the line, his trust, his praise, felt like hot coals against her skin. She nodded mutely, unable to speak further without her voice breaking, and retreated towards her own small, private hollow deeper within the den, the weight of her secret pressing down, threatening to crush her beneath its impossible burden. That night, sleep offered no escape, no respite. Her dreams were chaotic, fragmented nightmares filled with the deafening roar of the falls turning blood red, the burning amber eyes of the massive black wolf staring into her soul across an impassable chasm, the crushing weight of granite memorial stones bearing endless names whispered on the wind, and the horrifying, undeniable, magnetic pull of the mate bond, a phantom current dragging her inexorably towards an enemy she was sworn to destroy. She felt torn in two, ripped apart, her loyalty to her pack, her deep love for her father, her sacred duty as Luna, warring violently, agonizingly, with the ancient, inexplicable magic singing insistently in her blood, demanding she acknowledge the Alpha of Shadow Ridge. She woke long before dawn in a cold sweat, gasping for breath. The phantom scent of thunderstorms and deep, ancient forest clinging stubbornly to her senses like a shroud, an invisible mark she couldn't wash away, a constant, suffocating reminder of the impossible truth that had shattered her world. Days bled into a week, then two, under the heavy cloak of Aurora's secret. The immediate, raw shock of the revelation at the sunken falls began to subside, not lessening its horror, but transmuting into a gnawing, pervasive anxiety and a profound sense of alienation from her own pack, her own life. She felt like an imposter, moving through the familiar routines of the den, attending council meetings, overseeing training, mediating minor disputes, while harboring a truth that would shatter everything if revealed. She threw herself into her duties with ferocious intensity, seeking refuge in exhaustion, hoping relentless activity would silence the turmoil within. She oversaw training drills for the new recruits, her commands sharper, more demanding than usual, pushing them hard, perhaps pushing herself harder, trying to beat back the confusion with sheer physical exertion. She meticulously reviewed patrol reports from Fenrir, Ilara, and others, searching for any anomaly, any hint of unusual Shadow Ridge movement, hyper-aware now of the potential implications behind every sighting. Every stray scent reported near the border. She mediated minor pack disputes, squabbles over shared resources between families, disagreements between hunting parties over territory rotation, with forced patience. Her mind often miles away, wrestling with her own impossible conflict, the world seeming muted, less real than the constant thrumming beneath her skin. She spent increasing hours in the chamber of echoes, thought cool. Deep silence, a stark contrast to the chaos in her soul. Tracing the names on the cold granite stones, Reese, Lyra, Vorian Don Airn, Kale's older brother. So many others became a desperate ritual, an attempt to rekindle the pure, righteous hatred that had always fueled her resolve, her identity. This is who he is, she told herself fiercely, touching Reese's name, recalling his infectious laugh, silenced forever by Shadow Ridge claws in that skirmish over fishing rights. He is the reason they are gone. He leads the pack that killed them. This bond is a mockery. Anything to distract herself from the constant, low-level hum of the bond connecting her to Declan. A persistent, sickening vibration beneath her skin. A resonant frequency she couldn't tune out. She avoided the river border whenever possible, assigning Torvin or other trusted warriors like Ilara or Fenrir to lead patrols there, citing the need to focus on internal den security reviews or oversee resource management inventories deep within the mountain storage caves. The excuses felt flimsy even to her own ears, and she saw the flicker of suspicion in Torvin's eyes deepen with each deflection, his jaw tightening subtly when she delegated border command to Fenrir instead of him. But the awareness of Declan was inescapable, regardless of physical distance. It was a faint magnetic pull in the back of her mind, a subconscious knowledge of his general direction, like an invisible compass needle twitching persistently towards true north, or in her case, towards the dark heart of Blackfang Mountain. Worse, sometimes she received fleeting, unwelcome impressions through the bond, flashes of his mood, a volatile mix of sharp, biting frustration after what sounded like contentious council meetings within his own harsh territory. She could almost smell the cold stone and dominance, tightly controlled anger that mirrored her own suffocating predicament, and, disturbingly, a profound, poignant loneliness that resonated deeply with her own isolated position as keeper of this impossible secret. These flashes often came at unguarded moments, a jolt of his icy resolve while she tried to meditate, a wave of his crushing weariness while she tried to sleep. She ruthlessly suppressed these feelings, disgusted with herself for feeling any empathy, however involuntary, for the monster across the river. It's a trick, she told herself, a weakness the bond creates. She tried desperately to reinforce her hatred, reciting the litany of Shadow Ridge atrocities passed down through generations, visualizing the faces of the fallen Mooncrest wolves, recalling her father's grim, sparse accounts of Declan's brutal rise to Alpha after his own father's convenient hunting accident. She clung fiercely to the image of the ruthless butcher, the honorless enemy, the wolf who embodied the darkness they fought against. But the bond was insidious, a persistent whisper of doubt in the quiet moments of the night, when the den was silent and her defenses were low. Is he truly the monster everyone claims? He felt the bond too, I saw the shock, the despair before the mask slammed down. Why did he retreat at the falls instead of attacking when we were clearly vulnerable, and he held the tactical advantage? Why did he look lost for that split second before the alpha control asserted itself? The questions were poison, weakening her resolve, making her question the black and white certainties she had lived by her entire life. The simple truths reinforced since puphood. Then came the whispers within her own pack, growing louder, adding another layer of pressure. Resources were dwindling rapidly after a particularly harsh winter, followed by an unnaturally dry, lean spring. Game was becoming scarcer, driven away by the constant border tension that restricted safe hunting zones, or perhaps by something else unseen, moving in the deeper woods. The constant need for heightened security strained their hunting parties, forcing them to take greater risks, travel further afield into less familiar, more dangerous territory. The endless conflict was taking its toll, not just in lives lost, but in weary spirits, fraying nerves and hungry bellies, especially among the pups and elders. Some elders, like the ancient healer Maeve's predecessor, Old Hemlock, now long past, had murmured cautiously in council meetings past about the old ways described in obscure legends, about seeking balance, perhaps even exploring avenues for a lasting truce to conserve strength. Though they were quickly silenced by the majority, led by staunch traditionalists like Maeve herself, who clung to the familiar, comforting certainty of hatred and vengeance as the only path. Aurora, once firmly in Maeve's camp regarding the impossibility of peace, now found herself remembering Hemlock's words, listening more closely to those hushed, dissenting voices from the past. The idea of peace, once a naive, childish fantasy, began to seem less like idealism and more like a desperate necessity for the pack's long-term survival. But peace with the Shadow Ridge, peace brokered with Declan, the thought was still abhorrent, tangled inextricably with the horrifying reality of their unwanted, cursed connection. Could she ever face him across a negotiating table, knowing her very soul recognized him as mate? The conflict twisted inside her like a physical illness, leaving her perpetually exhausted and on edge, jumpy and irritable. The strain began to manifest in a more tangible, terrifying crisis. A sickness, known ominously as moonbane fever, started spreading rapidly through the lower, more crowded sections of the den, particularly affecting the vulnerable pups and the aging elders. It was a recurring ailment, often surfacing during times of stress, malnutrition, and overcrowding, causing high fevers that burned through reserves, debilitating weakness that left victims unable to hunt or fight, and a persistent, racking cough that echoed ominously through the caverns, a sound that frayed nerves raw. The pack healers, led by the sharp-tongued but highly skilled Elder Maeve, worked tirelessly, brewing strengthening broths and administering cooling poultices. But their supplies of the essential remedy, the rare moonbane petals, were dangerously low. Remnants from the last gathering 3 seasons ago. The reserves of moonbane petals are almost gone. Alpha, Maeve reported grimly to Kaelin during an urgent council meeting, her sharp, bird-like eyes flicking towards Aurora with barely concealed scrutiny as she spoke. Maeve, a staunch traditionalist who had served the pack for decades and deeply resented Kaelin's sometimes overly cautious leadership, compared to his predecessor's relentless aggression, had always been wary of Aurora's close bond with her father, seeing her as inheriting his softness. She seemed to sense Aurora's recent distraction, her pervasive unease, viewing it as weakness or lack of focus. The fever spreads like wildfire in the lower caves. Young Alara's den mother is gravely ill, and 3 more pups showed symptoms this morning. We need a gathering party sent into the Gloomwood immediately, before the next full moon wanes and its potency fades, or we will lose more lives, especially the young, the future of our pack. Kalen looked grave, the lines on his face deepening, his gaze drifting towards the healer's alcove, where the faint sounds of coughing could be heard. The Gloomwood is treacherous territory. Maeve, miles away, bordered by disputed lands claimed by neither pack, rife with rogue bands pushed out by leaner seasons, and filled with rumors of unnatural beasts stirred by recent disturbances. Especially now, with our warriors stretched thin maintaining border vigilance against Shadow Ridge. Luna Aurora is our most skilled tracker and fighter, Maeve stated flatly, her tone implying both fact and a subtle challenge. Her gaze fixed pointedly on Aurora. She knows the old paths better than anyone, having traveled there once with her mother, Serena, seeking rare silencing moss years ago. Serena herself trained her in navigating its dangers. If anyone can lead a party safely and return swiftly, it is her. Unless, Maeve added, her voice dripping slight skepticism. Her focus remains. Elsewhere, Aurora met Maeve's probing gaze, recognizing the underlying test. The implicit accusation of distraction. Maeve suspected something was amiss with her. This was an opportunity for Aurora to prove her focus, her unwavering dedication to the pack's well-being, to silence the whispers Maeve herself likely fueled, and the thought of the sick pups, their weak whimpers echoing in her memory. The fear in their mother's eyes spurred her to action, pushing aside her internal turmoil with fierce resolve. Her pack needed her. This was clear. This was duty. I will lead the gathering party. Father, she said firmly, her voice ringing with conviction, drawing strength from the clarity of purpose. We leave at dawn. Choose 4 of our swiftest, most resilient warriors. Maeve, Fenrir, naturally, perhaps young Kale for his speed, and Rorik and Lyra for their resilience, and 2 healers with intimate knowledge of the terrain and the petals themselves, like Nara and yourself, Elder. By including Maeve, she subtly asserted her authority and forced the Elder to participate directly. Maeve nodded curtly, perhaps surprised but accepting the direct command. We cannot delay. Time is critical. The journey into the Gloomwood was arduous, swiftly living up to its grim reputation. Dense, ancient trees, twisted into grotesque shapes by centuries of harsh weather and strange magic clinging to the region, choked out the sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight that played tricks on the eyes and frayed the nerves. The air itself felt heavy, thick with the smell of decay, damp earth, and something else, a faint wrongness, an unnatural stillness that prickled the senses and made their wolves uneasy. Strange, unseen creatures rustled constantly in the thick, decaying undergrowth, their scents alien and unsettling, different from familiar forest life. Aurora pushed her small team hard, navigating by instinct, fragmented memories from the trip years ago with her mother, recalling Serena's quiet confidence navigating the shadowed paths, and the subtle signs left by the forest itself, bent twigs, displaced stones, faint animal trails. They faced numerous challenges, treacherous ravines hidden by thick, clinging mist that muffled sound and distorted distances, forcing slow, careful progress. Territorial giant spiders whose iridescent webs shimmered with deadly neurotoxins in the faint light, forcing long, nerve-wracking detours around their nesting grounds, and disturbing signs of human trappers encroaching deeper than ever before from the south, discarded metal traps bearing unfamiliar trident symbols. Newly felled ancient trees marked for hauling with blue paint. The faint, greasy scent of human machinery oil clinging stubbornly to the breeze. An unnatural violation of the deep woods. One terrifying night, huddled for rest in a shallow, defensible overhang. They were stalked relentlessly by a shade lynx, a creature long thought to be mere legend, its coat blending perfectly with the deep shadows, its eyes glowing with a cold, unsettling, predatory intelligence. It moved like smoke, silent and deadly, probing their defenses, trying to pick off the weakest moments, its unnerving chirps echoing strangely in the oppressive silence. Only Aurora's quick thinking, her innate understanding of predator tactics honed since puphood, recalling her mother's lessons on countering feline agility, and a desperate, coordinated defense using thrown firebrands and loud, synchronized howling, finally drove the unnerving creature off, leaving the party shaken and acutely aware of the Gloomwood's deep, ancient dangers. Kale took a nasty scratch down his flank, requiring immediate attention from Maeve, whose sharp competence was undeniable despite her challenging demeanor. Throughout the perilous journey, the bond with Declan remained a persistent, low hum beneath her awareness, an unwelcome companion in the oppressive gloom. It seemed to pulse stronger in the unnatural atmosphere of the Gloomwood, reacting perhaps to the latent magic or the heightened danger. Sometimes, startlingly, jarringly, especially during the encounter with the Shade Lynx, she felt a flash of sharp concern that wasn't her own, a distant, echoing sense of protectiveness that seemed directed specifically towards her, like an invisible shield trying to form. Was he somehow aware of her danger through the bond, miles away across the river? Could he sense the specific perils of the Gloomwood across the miles separating them? The thought was both deeply infuriating, an invasion of her privacy, her autonomy, a sign of the bond's invasive nature, and strangely, shamefully comforting in the face of the palpable dangers surrounding her. She ruthlessly shoved the feeling aside each time it surfaced, attributing it to her own heightened stress, focusing fiercely on her mission, on the warriors and healers relying on her leadership. After 3 grueling, exhausting days, marked by near misses and constant vigilance, they finally found the hidden dell where the moonbane petals grew, nestled beside a small, bubbling spring, shrouded in protective mist, untouched by the encroaching gloom. Their soft, silvery light pulsed gently in the dimness, an ethereal beacon of hope against the encroaching sickness back home. A collective sigh of relief washed over the small party as they carefully, reverently gathered as much of the precious, delicate flora as they could safely carry, their leather pouches soon glowing softly with curative light. The journey back was faster, driven by the urgency of their mission and the profound relief of success, though the dangers remained ever-present, requiring constant alertness. They returned to the Mooncrest Den 5 days after leaving, exhausted, scratched, but triumphant. The precious petals immediately entrusted to Maeve, whose grudging nod of approval towards Aurora, though barely perceptible, felt almost as rewarding as the hope shining in the eyes of the mothers whose pups were suffering from the fever. Maeve and her healers immediately set to work preparing the remedies, but the respite, the sense of accomplishment, was brief, hollowed out by the secret she still carried, the internal pressure, the weight of the bond. The constant awareness of Declan became unbearable within the close confines of the den. Surrounded by the very wolves she felt she was betraying with her secret connection, one evening, driven by a restlessness she couldn't contain, a desperate need for open air that didn't smell of enclosed caves, lingering sickness, simmering tension, and her own suffocating secret, Aurora slipped away from the den alone. She told herself she needed to check the northern perimeter personally, near the old Willow Bend, to ensure the sentries were alert after the recent focus on the Gloomwood expedition had potentially diverted attention. But her feet, guided by an instinct she fought against with every fiber of her being, by the insistent thrumming beneath her skin that intensified as she neared the river, drew her inexorably towards the water, not towards the sunken falls, forever tainted by the memory of the horrifying revelation, but towards a quieter, more secluded stretch further downstream, bordered by ancient weeping willows, their long, trailing branches dipping into the water like grieving tendrils, a place few patrols frequented due to the marshy ground. The moon was nearly full, just a few nights shy, casting an ethereal, silvery light on the water, turning the ripples to molten silver, illuminating the border she was forbidden to approach too closely, especially alone, under Kalen's strict orders. She sat hidden among the thick, gnarled roots of the largest willow, letting the cool night air soothe her frayed nerves. The gentle murmur of the river, a stark contrast to the silent turmoil screaming inside her. Her wolf paced relentlessly beneath her skin, agitated, restless, keyed up. It knew. It sensed him. He was near, pulled here by the same invisible force. And then, he was there. Not in wolf form this time, but as a man, standing silently on the opposite bank, partially obscured by the deep shadows cast by his own territory's ancient pines. Declan, he was tall, powerfully built even in human form, broader across the shoulders than most wolves she knew, radiating an aura of contained strength and absolute stillness. He wore simple, dark leather trousers and a loose, dark tunic that blended easily into the night shadows, practical gear for navigating the harsh terrain. Shaggy dark hair, slightly longer than practical, fell over a strong, angular face, its harsh lines softened slightly by the mellow moonlight. He wasn't looking at her initially, but staring downriver, his profile stark and imposing against the moonlit water, his expression unreadable in the dim light, contemplative, perhaps weary, carrying the weight of his own burdens, the loneliness she sometimes sensed flashing across the bond starkly visible in his solitude. Aurora froze, her breath catching in her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every instinct, honed by years of warfare and generations of ingrained hatred, screamed at her to run, to shift, to raise the alarm, to attack the enemy Alpha, violating the spirit, if not the letter, of the truce by being so close, alone. But the bond held her captive, a strange, paralyzing mix of heart-pounding fear and unwilling fascination, rooting her to the spot beneath the concealing willow branches. He hadn't crossed the river. He wasn't posturing aggressively. He just stood there, a solitary, powerful figure against the backdrop of the silent, moon-washed night, alone, vulnerable, almost, if such a word could ever apply to the fearsome Alpha Declan. Then, slowly, as if sensing her presence despite her deep concealment, as if pulled by the same invisible thread that had drawn her there, he turned his head. His gaze found her unerringly in the shadows beneath the willow. There was no mistaking the piercing amber intensity she'd first seen in his wolf form, now housed in a human face that was disturbingly compelling, starkly handsome in a rugged, dangerous way. Despite the faint white scar tracing his jawline, a memento of some past battle, perhaps even the one that made him Alpha. His stare was unsettlingly direct, unwavering, seeming to strip away her defenses. He didn't move closer, didn't speak immediately. They simply watched each other across the shimmering, silently flowing divide, the river between them like a physical manifestation of their pack's ingrained hatred and their impossible, undeniable connection. The air crackled with the energy of the bond. Thicker, more potent than ever under the near-full moon. It wasn't just a subconscious pull anymore. It felt like a silent conversation unfolding without words, a shared, unwilling acknowledgement of the impossible situation they were both trapped in. She thought she saw the same deep conflict mirrored in his eyes that constantly warred within her own soul, the crushing weight of leadership, the deeply ingrained animosity passed down through bloodlines, warring desperately with this inexplicable, unwanted, magnetic connection that defied all logic and loyalty. She saw the exhaustion, too, the same bone-deep weariness she felt herself. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and rough, yet carrying easily across the murmuring water. A deep baritone that sent an involuntary shiver down her spine, a sound both threatening and disturbingly resonant, touching a chord deep within her she didn't know existed. Luna Aurora, just hearing him say her name, stripped of the usual hostile context, spoken with quiet intensity rather than aggression, sent a jolt through her, part revulsion, part forbidden, treacherous thrill. She remained silent, hidden, her hand hovering instinctively near the knife strapped to her thigh, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, every nerve on high alert. "I know what happened at the falls," he continued, his voice quiet but intense, cutting through the sounds of the river like obsidian. "I felt it too, the bond." Aurora's breath hitched painfully. He was acknowledging it, openly, naming the catastrophic, world-altering truth she had been desperately trying to deny, to bury, to pretend hadn't happened. Hearing him say it aloud made it terrifyingly real, stripping away her denial like flimsy armor. "This changes nothing." She forced the words out, her voice tight, brittle with hostility she hoped masked the tremor beneath, the wave of conflicting emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "You are my enemy. Your pack murdered my kin, my friends." The names from the memorial stones flashed through her mind: Reese, Lyra, Vorian, Arn, desperately sought fuel for her flagging hatred. A shadow, perhaps regret or profound weariness, crossed Declan's face in the moonlight before his expression hardened again into alpha neutrality. "And yours mine," he countered, his voice devoid of accusation, merely stating a reciprocal, tragic fact that underscored the bloody futility of their conflict. Generations lost on both sides. This war, it bleeds us both dry. Luna. Generation after generation fighting over ghosts and grievances we barely comprehend anymore. Repeating the same cycles of violence. For what? Ancestors' grudges that neither of us started. Lines on a map drawn in blood. His words echoed the unwelcome thoughts that had begun plaguing her own mind since the fever crisis. Aurora bristled, indignation rising sharply, pushing back against the unwelcome, dangerous truth in his words. "Your pack constantly provokes, raids our borders, kills without honor. Malakor's betrayal of the Unity Pact, the murder of my Uncle Aaron, started this latest cycle of blood. You uphold this war with your every action, your every aggressive patrol. Do I?" He took a deliberate step closer to the river's edge, the moonlight catching the hard planes of his face, revealing the stark scar along his jawline more clearly. "Or do I lead a pack just as trapped in this relentless cycle as yours? Just as fearful of showing weakness lest the other side pounce? Just as indoctrinated with hatred from the moment we leave the den? My father," he paused, a flicker of something unreadable. Deep pain, perhaps, or icy control, flashing in his eyes, ruled through fear and constant aggression. Mirroring Malakor, I seek stability, strength through discipline and resource management, not endless bloodshed that weakens us all and leaves us vulnerable. He held her gaze, unwavering, searching hers across the water as if trying to gauge her sincerity, her capacity for reason beyond ingrained enmity. I saw your face at the falls, the horror, the denial. You felt it too. This connection, this impossible bond. Do you honestly think I wanted this? To be bound by fate itself to the daughter of Kaelin, the pride of Mooncrest, the living embodiment of everything I was raised to despise, everything my most powerful elders still demand I destroy. His words mirrored her own chaotic thoughts, her own desperate denial. So closely it was unnerving, stripping away her carefully constructed defenses layer by layer. He felt trapped, too. He hadn't chosen this monstrous twist of fate either. It's a curse, she whispered, the words torn from her throat, heavy with a despair that suddenly felt horrifyingly shared, amplifying its unbearable weight rather than lessening it. Perhaps, Declan conceded, his gaze lifting for a moment to the brilliant, nearly full moon dominating the night sky, a silent, impartial observer to their impossible meeting. Or perhaps, he hesitated, looking not at her now, but out at the dark flowing water, the eternal boundary. Perhaps the goddess has a cruel, unfathomable sense of humor, binding enemies together. Or perhaps, she sees something we, blinded by generations of bloodshed and ingrained hatred, cannot. A purpose hidden in the madness. Aurora scoffed, a harsh, choked sound meant to convey derision, though it lacked true conviction even to her own ears. The insidious doubt was creeping in, unwelcome and terrifying. She sees only an abomination, a bond between predator and prey, designed to tear us apart. Declan's eyes snapped back to hers, a flash of something sharp, anger, or perhaps pain, in their amber depths. We are both predators, Luna, he stated firmly, his voice regaining its hard edge. We are predators bound by duty and instinct, and we are both prey to this endless war that consumes our people, weakens us, makes us vulnerable to threats beyond our borders. He sighed then, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries of conflict, the crushing burden of leadership he hadn't asked for but couldn't escape. I did not seek you out tonight to fight, nor to embrace this madness that binds us. He gestured vaguely towards the unseen border stretching between their territories, the disputed lands where ambushes were common, particularly near the sparsely populated Grey Hills region to the north. There are whispers, even within my own council. Dissatisfaction with the status quo. Resources are thin for us too. The game's scarce after the hard winter and dry spring. The mountains yield little sustenance. And something else, something more concerning. Rogue elements stirring in the disputed lands near the Grey Hills. Not just lone exiles driven by hunger, but organized packs. Strange attacks on patrols from both sides. Tracks that don't match Mooncrest signatures, nor standard Shadow Ridge pack patterns, deliberately obscured. Tactics that feel different, more desperate, more savage, less strategic than typical wolf conflict. Aurora frowned, her mind instantly shifting into strategist mode. The immediate, tangible danger momentarily overriding the personal turmoil. Her own patrols had reported strange tracks recently near the Grey Hills borders, hushed accounts of fleeting glimpses of unusually large, heavily scarred wolves, and ambushes that felt different, more chaotic, more brutal, almost frenzied, lacking the disciplined kill tactics typical of Shadow Ridge warriors. Kaelin, influenced perhaps by Maeve's dismissive certainty and Torvin's insistence, it was merely a new Shadow Ridge deception tactic designed to sow confusion, had dismissed them as anomalies or exaggerated fear. Could Declan be telling the truth, or was this just another elaborate manipulation, playing on their shared hardships, their resource scarcity, to gain an advantage? Why tell me this? She asked, suspicion lacing her tone, her hand tightening instinctively on her knife. Why reveal a potential weakness, a potential common enemy to your sworn foe? Because, Declan said, his voice dropping lower, becoming almost intimate despite the distance and the rushing water between them. The sound vibrating along the sensitive frequency of the bond, resonating deep within her. Whatever this bond is, this cursed connection, it exists. It connects us on some level I don't understand, some level beyond animosity or pack loyalty. It screams warnings I can't ignore. And because I am tired, Luna Aurora, tired of the bloodshed, tired of sending young wolves out on patrols, knowing some might not return, dying for grudges they barely understand, for land their ancestors fought over centuries ago, I became Alpha to protect my pack, to make them strong enough to survive the harsh mountains, not to lead them into annihilation over ghosts of the past, or blindly follow my father's path to ruin. His words resonated with a startling, unwelcome sincerity, echoing the deep weariness settling in her own spirit, the same crushing burden of responsibility she carried for her own pack's future, especially now with the fever straining their resources thin. Could the fearsome Alpha Declan, the ruthless enemy Alpha, the monster of Moon Crest legend, actually desire something other than perpetual war? Could he be as trapped, as burdened by the weight of history and expectation, as she felt? Could he genuinely be seeking a different path, one forced upon him by circumstance and this damnable bond? You expect me to believe you, she challenged, suspicion still warring fiercely with the unsettling honesty in his voice and the insistent, undeniable thrum of the bond pulsing between them like a living thing. Just like that, after decades of lies and betrayals from your pack, after the Sunstone Valley massacre, after Crimson Ford, I expect nothing, Declan replied quietly, his shoulders slumping slightly, a fleeting glimpse of vulnerability quickly masked by regained alpha composure. I offer only a truth as I see it, a warning based on what my scouts report and what this connection whispers. He inhaled deeply, seeming to gather his resolve. Think on it. These rogues, whoever they are, whatever motivates them beyond desperation, grow bolder. They test the borders, probe for weaknesses. If our packs continue to tear each other apart, focusing only on our ancient hatred, expending our strength on pointless skirmishes, who will be left to stop them when they decide they want more than just the disputed lands? When they grow strong enough to threaten our dens directly, when they come for our pups, Luna, when outside forces realize we are ripe for conquest. He held her gaze for one long, intense moment more, the bond pulsing between them like a shared, erratic heartbeat in the quiet night, a silent acknowledgement of the potential shared danger, a burden suddenly falling on both their shoulders. Then, without another word, without waiting for a response, he turned and melted back into the deep shadows of the Shadow Ridge forest, leaving her alone with his disturbing words. The impossible weight of their connection and the terrifying first seeds of doubt planted firmly in the poisoned soil of her inherited hatred. Aurora remained hidden by the river long after he was gone. The echo of his words, the startling intensity of his presence, swirling around her like the mist off the water. He hadn't threatened, hadn't demanded, hadn't tried to force the bond or use it against her. He had spoken of shared weariness, a potential common enemy, a desperate, pragmatic desire for something other than endless, grinding war that was weakening them both. And beneath it all, the undeniable pull of their connection thrummed, a silent, insistent testament to the impossible truth he had spoken. They were bound, for better or worse, by fate and circumstance. The seed of doubt, planted by the bond at the sunken falls, nurtured by her own exhaustion with the ceaseless conflict, and the dwindling resources stressed further by the fever, and now watered by Declan's unexpected, pragmatic warning, was beginning to sprout tenacious roots in the stony ground of her hatred. Could Declan be different from the monster of Mooncrest legend? Could he be different from his ruthless father, Grok, or the treacherous Malachor? Could peace, however fragile, however improbable, however difficult to conceive, actually be possible? And the most terrifying question of all, the one that made her wolf whine low and confused in her chest, could this cursed bond, this abomination, be not a weapon intended to destroy her and her pack, but somehow a bridge, a necessary evil ordained by the goddess for a purpose she couldn't yet fathom? The thought felt like treason, dangerous and seductive in its terrifying logic. She looked across the dark river, into the shadows where her enemy, her mate, had disappeared, and for the first time, she didn't just see an enemy defined by history and bloodshed. She saw a possibility, however faint, however perilous, and it scared her more than any battle she had ever fought, more than any wound she had ever sustained, more than the dark depths of the Gloomwood itself. The days following her clandestine meeting with Declan at the willow-shaded riverbank were fraught with internal conflict and a growing, unnerving sense of clarity for Aurora. His words about the rogues, about the futility of their endless war draining both packs, echoed persistently in her mind, challenging the deeply ingrained narratives of Shadow Ridge barbarity she had been raised on. Narratives reinforced daily by elders like Maeve and warriors like Torvin, whose grief seemed to fuel an almost religious devotion to vengeance. The profound weariness Declan expressed mirrored her own, a heavy cloak she wore daily beneath her Luna in waiting composure, a burden Kaelin also clearly carried, evident in the deepening lines around his eyes and the slight slump in his shoulders during late-night council sessions discussing dwindling food stores. She began scrutinizing patrol reports with a new, critical eye, questioning the automatic assumptions made about attacks in the disputed territories near the Grey Hills. Were they truly standard Shadow Ridge aggressions, designed solely to provoke or test defenses, as Torvin vehemently insisted in every briefing, or, as Declan suggested, the work of desperate, unaffiliated rogues carving out their own space in the chaos, perhaps even directed by an unseen hand manipulating both packs? The evidence, viewed without the lens of automatic blame, was often ambiguous. Tracks deliberately obscured using pine boughs or fast-flowing streams, attack patterns inconsistent with typical Shadow Ridge discipline, more frenzied, less strategic, often targeting supply caches rather than warriors. Eyewitness accounts from injured survivors contradictory under the stress of trauma and fear. It was always easier, politically safer within the top pack, to blame the known enemy. Maeve consistently framed any anomaly as Shadow Ridge deception. But Declan's suggestion offered an alternative, deeply unsettling explanation that demanded impartial investigation, however risky that might be personally and politically. The mate bond was a constant, undeniable presence now, a low hum beneath the surface of her awareness, impossible to ignore, impossible to deny. It was no longer just a horrifying curse to be resisted, but a complex, confusing entity weaving itself into the very fabric of her being, affecting her thoughts, her emotions, her very instincts. It brought unwelcome flashes of Declan's emotions, waves of sharp frustration, after what sounded like contentious council meetings where she could almost hear the dissenting growls of hardliners. A surprising, echoing loneliness that resonated deeply with her own isolated position as keeper of this impossible secret, and a fierce, unyielding determination to protect his pack from internal strife and external threats that, disturbingly, she recognized mirrored in her own soul. It felt intrusive and unwanted, a violation of her mental sovereignty, yet undeniably real. A connection forged by forces beyond her understanding, sometimes bringing unexpected insights. One afternoon, while reviewing Kalen's old strategy maps, she felt a sudden flash of Declan's strategic thinking, a perspective on mountain pass defenses she hadn't considered. Born from his harsh terrain, it startled and disgusted her. Yet the tactical insight was undeniably valid. Sometimes, when the connection flared unexpectedly, a sudden jolt of his awareness while she was overseeing training drills, making her falter mid-command, earning a sharp look from Torvin, or a wave of inexplicable longing for something, understanding perhaps. While she stared into the flickering embers of the den fire late at night, she would feel a sharp pang, a physical ache for proximity to him that she ruthlessly suppressed, flushing with shame and self-disgust. How could she long for the nearness of the man whose pack represented everything she fought against? It felt like a profound betrayal of herself, of her father, of her pack, of Reese and Lyra, and every Mooncrest warrior who had fallen to Shadow Ridge claws. Torvin, ever watchful, noticed her distraction, her deepening pensiveness, the subtle shifts in her arguments during council discussions, where she now occasionally questioned the automatic assignment of blame for border incidents, suggesting alternative possibilities that Maeve quickly shot down. He watched her with concerned, narrowed eyes during training sessions and patrol briefings, his loyalty manifesting as protective, almost suffocating scrutiny. "Something weighs heavily on you, Aurora," he said one crisp afternoon as they practiced sparring drills in the echoing training cave, his movements precise and powerful, his blows carrying more force than necessary for practice, forcing her to focus completely to avoid being overwhelmed. He seemed almost desperate to draw her back to their familiar dynamic, to the certainty of their shared past and mutual hatred of the enemy. Aurora parried his heavy wooden practice staff with her own, the sharp clap echoing in the cavern like a gunshot. She forced herself to meet his intense gaze, refusing to show weakness, pushing back against his aggression. Leadership carries weight. Torvin, you know that as well as I do. The pack's safety, the dwindling resources, the lingering effects of the fever. It's a heavy burden to share with Father. I know the weight of command, he countered, pressing his attack relentlessly, his superior strength forcing her back a step towards the damp cave wall. I also know you. This is different. This preoccupation, this distance, it started after the encounter at the Sunken Falls. After you faced Declan directly. He paused mid-strike, his dark eyes searching hers intently, suspicion warring openly with his fierce protectiveness. Did he do something? Curse you? Say something. Threaten you specifically? Tell me, Aurora, I need to know, as your second, as your friend. I have a right to know what threat you faced. There was an undercurrent of possessive anger in his voice, a territoriality regarding her safety and her allegiance that made her deeply uncomfortable. He is the threat, Torvin, she snapped, perhaps too sharply, leveraging his brief pause to disengage, stepping back, breathing heavily, regaining her composure. His very existence threatens us all. That hasn't changed. She lowered her staff, trying to project calm authority, channeling her Luna persona. I am fine. Just contemplating the future. The long-term cost of this endless war. Is perpetual conflict truly the only way? Hemlock sometimes spoke of cycles. Torvin's intense expression softened slightly, concern momentarily replacing suspicion, perhaps mistaking her genuine weariness for simple leadership stress or grief dredging up old healers' tales. We all feel it. Luna, Kalen grows older, carries the weight of decades. The pack looks to you more each day for strength, for certainty. But we endure. We always have. We are Mooncrest. His hand rested briefly, firmly, on her shoulder. A gesture intended as comfort but feeling strangely possessive, almost proprietary, staking a claim she didn't want. We will prevail. Aurora, I'll stand with you. Always. We just need to remain vigilant against them. Trust our traditions. Trust our strength. Don't let their shadows or phantom rogue tales cloud your judgment. His unwavering loyalty, his black and white certainty, was a comfort in its familiarity, a seemingly solid anchor in the storm of her confusion. Yet his rigidity, his unquestioning adherence to the old hatred, the absolute dichotomy of us versus them, end quote, felt increasingly stifling, dangerously narrow-minded in the face of the complexities Declan had hinted at. Complexities suggested by the ambiguous reports from the Grey Hills. He represented the past, the seemingly endless cycle of violence Declan had spoken of with such soul-crushing weariness. Was there truly no other way forward? Could they afford to ignore a potential common enemy, a potential internal manipulation using rogues as pawns, while bleeding each other dry based on assumptions and ancient history? What if Declan was right, and Maeve and Torvin's insistence was blinding them to a growing danger, driven by a desperate need for answers, for confirmation or denial of Declan's claims about the rogues, for tangible proof that might sway Kaelin or even circumvent Maeve's council influence, and perhaps pulled by the relentless, insistent gravity of the bond she could no longer fully suppress? Aurora found herself near the willow-shaded part of the riverbank again a few nights later. The moon was just a thin, waning sliver, offering deeper shadows, more reliable concealment. She didn't know if Declan would be there, didn't even know consciously if she wanted him to be there. She told herself she was scouting, observing the border under the cover of darkness, gathering intelligence on potential rogue movements near the area Declan had hinted at, the region bordering the desolate Grey Hills. That was her duty. But deep down, a traitorous part of her, the part that resonated with his weariness and the undeniable pull of the bond, knew she was hoping for, perhaps even needing, another glimpse of the enemy Alpha who defied expectations. The male inexplicably bound to her soul, the only one in the world who might understand the impossible, terrifying position she was in. If the rogues were real, coordinated, they needed to know. The pack's survival superseded even the hatred. He was there, waiting. Standing not by the water's edge this time, but leaning with casual stillness against a large, ancient sycamore tree, deeper in the shadows on his side of the river, almost invisible until her heightened senses picked out his familiar, potent scent, thunderstorm and ancient earth, overlaying the damp riverbank smells. It was as if he had known, somehow, through the strange connection that bound them, that the weight of uncertainty and the pull of the bond would bring her back tonight. He looked up as she slipped silently into her usual spot beneath the concealing willow branches, his expression guarded, unreadable in the scant moonlight filtering through the dense canopy. "Luna," he acknowledged quietly, his voice a low rumble that barely disturbed the night air, yet it sent that familiar, unwanted shiver down her spine, a mix of fear and unwilling resonance. Aurora stayed within the deep cover of the willows on her bank, the familiar scent of damp earth and willow leaves mingling strangely with the faint, persistent scent emanating from across the river, Declan's scent, now inextricably linked with the mate bond and the dangerous potential of truth in her mind. "Alpha," she replied, keeping her voice steady, focusing on the mission, the strategic justification for this secret, dangerous, potentially treasonous meeting. Your words last time, about the rogues, about strange tracks and coordinated attacks. Have you learned anything more definitive? My own patrols have noted irregularities near the Gray Hills recently. Unusual activity. Scents that don't match either pack. She needed a concrete reason, a strategic justification to give herself, to silence the screaming accusations of her ancestors in her mind. It couldn't be about the bond. Not yet. Maybe never. Declan pushed away from the tree, walking with silent, predatory grace closer to the water's edge, the faint starlight catching the silver threads at his muzzle and highlighting the sharp lines of his face. "My patrols confirm it," he stated, his voice devoid of triumph, only grim confirmation. "Multiple confirmed sightings. Tracks unlike our own or yours. Consistently found concentrated near the network of abandoned mine shafts deep within the Gray Hills. Treacherous territory neither pack has claimed for decades due to unstable tunnels and lingering rumors of sickness. Rock cough from the old human mining days." He paused, his gaze intense, locking onto hers even in the darkness, demanding her full attention, conveying the gravity. "They attacked one of my hunting parties yesterday, near dusk, close to the mine entrances. A coordinated ambush using pitfalls and nets, not typical wolf tactics. We lost 2 young wolves, barely blooded warriors making their first extended hunt. They fight with a desperate savagery I haven't seen before. No recognizable pack markings, no coherent battle calls, just hunger, rage, and surprising, brutal coordination." Aurora absorbed this grim news, her mind racing. The casual dismissal by Maeve and Torvin, suddenly feeling criminally negligent. Declan's confirmation lent the sporadic Mooncrest reports terrifying weight, suggesting a coherent pattern, a growing external threat they were willfully ignoring while focusing obsessively on the internal feud. "Why haven't you driven them out decisively?" she asked, probing, testing his honesty, needing to understand his capability and motives. "The Gray Hills border your territory more closely than ours. Surely you have the strength to crush a band of disorganized rogues." A humorless, almost bitter smile touched Declan's lips, a brief flash of cynical self-awareness. "My pack elders, particularly Elder Volkov, a powerful traditionalist who deeply misses my father's openly aggressive ways and sees my focus on consolidation as weakness, believe it's an elaborate Mooncrest ploy." His voice was laced with frustration. "Volkov insists it's a sophisticated trap designed by Kalen to lure my warriors into unstable ground, weaken my forces for a decisive strike. He argues loudly in council that you orchestrate these rogue attacks, using deception just as Malachor supposedly did. He urges retaliation against Mooncrest for the lost hunters, demanding blood for blood according to the old code, not wasting resources on some phantom rogue band." He sighed, the sound rough, weary, echoing the frustration she often felt battling Maeve's intransigence and Torvin's blind hatred. "Generations of mistrust are hard to overcome, Luna. On both sides of this cursed river, easier to blame the devil you know than face an unknown threat." They stood in silence for a long moment. Ent, the chilling truth of his words hanging heavy and suffocating between them, thicker than the night mist rising from the water. The river, the physical boundary of their hatred, seemed suddenly like a flimsy, arbitrary line compared to the towering, invisible walls of prejudice, suspicion, and grief built over lifetimes of conflict. Walls actively reinforced by influential figures in both packs. "What do you propose?" Aurora asked eventually, the question feeling momentous, dangerous, like stepping off a cliff edge into the unknown, uttering words that felt like treason against her ancestors, against Kalen's suffering, against Reese and Lyra's graves. Yet, logic demanded it. Duty demanded it. Declan met her eyes directly across the flowing water, his gaze holding hers captive, serious and intent, acknowledging the leap of faith her question represented. Information. Shared intelligence. Cautiously. Discreetly. If we both know where the rogues are striking, where they are based, map their movements, perhaps we can contain them, possibly even eliminate them, without tearing each other apart in the process. A temporary, targeted truce focused solely on this external threat. No pack markings revealed. No direct contact between patrols, unless absolutely unavoidable. Maximum deniability. Sharing intelligence with the enemy Alpha, coordinating actions, even indirectly. It was unthinkable. Treasonous by any definition her pack held. Kaelin might eventually understand, if presented with irrefutable proof of the danger and the source. But Maeve, Torvin, never. They would see it as ultimate betrayal, proof of her weakness, her corruption by the bond. Yet, undeniably logical. If the rogues were a genuine, growing threat to both packs, potentially manipulated by outside forces, then fighting them blindly while simultaneously fighting each other was strategic suicide. It served only the rogues, or whoever might be backing them, waiting patiently in the shadows. It served the agenda Volkov seemed determined to push. It served Maeve's rigid worldview. It did not serve the survival of the Mooncrest pack. This decision felt heavier than any burden she had carried, a gamble with potentially fatal consequences. How? Aurora whispered, the word barely audible above the river's constant murmur, her mind struggling to grasp the practicalities, the immense risks involved, the sheer weight of potential betrayal. How can we possibly trust each other enough for that? After everything. After generations of spilled blood and broken packs. We don't, Declan stated bluntly, offering no false assurances, his pragmatism cutting through the emotional turmoil like a clean blade. Not yet. Not fully. We verify independently when possible. We proceed with extreme caution. But this bond, he gestured vaguely between them with one hand, a reluctant acknowledgement of the inexplicable connection that hummed palpably in the air, an undeniable current flowing beneath the surface of their animosity. It tells me things. It suggests you are not inherently deceitful, despite everything I was raised to believe about Mooncrest wolves and their supposed treacherous ways under Kaelin's soft leadership. Does it not speak to you as well, Luna? Beyond the repulsion, beyond the fear, does it not offer some resonance of truth, however unwelcome? Beneath the layers of duty and hatred, Aurora couldn't deny it. Annoyingly, frustratingly. The bond did resonate with a sense of Declan's core integrity, buried deep beneath layers of necessary alpha authority, inherited ruthlessness, and the harsh realities of surviving in his unforgiving territory. It didn't excuse his pack's history, nor did it mean she liked or trusted him implicitly. Far from it. But it suggested he wasn't playing a simple, treacherous game. Not about this specific threat. The bond felt truthful, in its own terrifying, undeniable way, a compass pointing towards a deeply uncomfortable reality. It complicates things, she admitted reluctantly, the understatement feeling absurdly inadequate, almost comical given the catastrophic nature of their connection. That, Declan murmured, a hint of dry, dark irony entering his tone. The first non-hostile sound she'd heard from him that wasn't laced with command or weariness. Is perhaps the only thing we can agree on without reservation tonight. He then proposed a practical, cautious method for the exchange. Dead drops. Specific, easily identifiable, but relatively hidden locations in the neutral territory bordering the Gray Hills. A hollow under a lightning-struck ancient oak, clearly visible from both territories' ridgelines. A dry crevice behind a specific, seldom visited waterfall known historically to scouts from both packs from past border skirmishes. Scouts from either side, operating utterly alone and under extreme secrecy. Using phases of the moon for timing, could leave coded messages. Simple symbols or runes, neither pack commonly used in external communications. Based on ancient forest lore, perhaps small maps scratched onto bark marked with recent rogue activity sightings, locations of strange tracks, or warnings of suspected impending movements. No direct contact needed between patrols, unless absolutely necessary for immediate confirmation or intervention in a crisis. Minimal risk of direct exposure, maximum deniability if discovered by their own suspicious packmates. It was a plan born of desperation and extreme caution. It was a tentative first step, fraught with immense personal peril for both of them. If discovered by their own packs, they would both face immediate accusations of treason, potentially execution or exile. Kaelin might listen to reason, perhaps, given undeniable proof of the rogue threat, but the Pack Council, heavily swayed by Maeve's traditionalism and Torvin's vocal influence, never. They would condemn her without trial, and Declan's own hardline elders like Volkov would likely see it as definitive proof of weakness or betrayal, immediate grounds for a violent leadership challenge, which rumors suggested Declan had faced before and suppressed brutally. Yet, the potential benefit, preventing further bloodshed on both sides from rogue attacks, possibly uncovering the truth about the rogue threat and its potential origins before it overwhelmed them, seemed, logically, chillingly, to outweigh the enormous personal risk. Survival, perhaps, demanded radical, dangerous measures. Survival might demand trusting the enemy, trusting her mate. It was the most terrifying gamble of her life. "I need to think," Aurora said, her voice barely audible, her mind reeling from the implications. The sheer audacity of his proposal, the weight of potential consequences pressing down on her. She needed to weigh the pack's immediate safety against the risk of utter betrayal in their eyes. "Take your time," Declan replied, his tone even, betraying no impatience, understanding the magnitude of the decision she faced. "But the rogues won't wait for us to overcome a century of hatred. They grow stronger, bolder with each passing moon. Their attacks become more targeted." He turned to leave, blending back into the shadows like smoke, then paused, his silhouette dark and imposing against the slightly less dark trees. "Aurora." She looked up, startled he'd used her name without her title again. The sound strangely intimate, almost possessive, cutting through the formality in the quiet night air. "Be careful," he said softly, his gaze holding hers for one potent charged moment, a flicker of genuine concern, or perhaps shared understanding of their mutual danger, crossing the water between them like an invisible thread before he vanished completely into the darkness of the Shadow Ridge forest, leaving only his unsettling scent and the echo of his warning hanging in the air. Aurora returned to the Mooncrest den well before dawn, her mind reeling, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Declan's proposal was radical, dangerous, bordering on insane, yet undeniably practical if the rogue threat was as real and coordinated as he claimed. And as the ambiguous reports increasingly suggested, his final warning, spoken with what felt like genuine sincerity, amplified unsettlingly by the bond, lingered, echoing the deep unease she felt herself about the situation in the Grey Hills. She spent the next day observing her pack with new, troubled eyes, listening intently to the undercurrents of fear and frustration beneath the surface of daily life. She saw the young warriors, like Kale, eager for glory and battle against Shadow Ridge, but blissfully unaware of the true, grinding cost of perpetual war, the hollowing out of their future, the slow drain on resources. She saw the elders, weary and increasingly frail from the lingering effects of the fever and lean rations, trapped by tradition and ancient hatreds, unable or unwilling to envision another path. Deferring largely to Maeve's certainty, she saw her father, Kalen, his shoulders slumped slightly under the immense burden of leadership, struggling to maintain morale while vital resources dwindled and the fever, though receding thanks to the moonbane petals, still lingered worryingly in the lower caves, leaving lasting weakness. Declan's words about being trapped in a cycle echoed louder than ever in the close confines of the den. Was blind hatred the path of their ancestors, truly the only path forward, or was it a path leading both packs inexorably towards mutual destruction, leaving the spoils for opportunistic rogues or encroaching humans waiting patiently on the periphery, like the ones leaving traps in the gloomwood? The choice Declan presented felt less like strategy and more like a precipice. Maintain the status quo and potentially bleed out slowly, or take a terrifying leap of faith based on the word of an enemy and the unwilling evidence of a cursed bond, risking immediate self-destruction if discovered. That evening, under the cloak of the new moon, a sliver of darkness perfect for concealment, she made her decision. Duty to the pack's survival, however unconventional the path, had to outweigh ingrained tradition and personal fear. Using coded symbols known only to high-ranking Mooncrest officers for highly sensitive communication, symbols based on constellations and phases of the moon, intricate patterns taught to her by Kalen himself years ago for secure communication in times of crisis. Symbols she prayed Declan could decipher. She prepared a small, tightly sealed scroll of cured hide. On it, she briefly noted recent observations from her own most trusted, discreet scouts, carefully omitting Declan's influence on her directives, to send them specifically to the Grey Hills borders about strange tracks, deliberately crossing streams to hide scent trails and reports of unusually aggressive badger activity, often a sign of displaced predators or unusual, non-native scents driving them from their sets near the northern border cliffs, close to the abandoned mine shafts, subtly corroborating Declan's claims without explicitly referencing his information or revealing anything strategically sensitive about Mooncrest patrol strengths or timings. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she slipped away from the den unnoticed, melting into the moonless night like a phantom, guilt and necessity warring within her, navigating the treacherous neutral ground between territories, miles from either den, her senses on high alert for any sign of patrol, Mooncrest, Shadow Ridge, or worse, rogue. She found the designated spot Declan had described, the hollow beneath the gnarled, exposed roots of the lightning-struck ancient oak, a skeletal sentinel tree visible from afar on the ridges, but offering surprising concealment up close in the tangled undergrowth at its base. Her hands trembled slightly as she tucked the scroll deep into the hollow, covering it carefully with dry leaves and loose earth, leaving intelligence, however vague, for the enemy Alpha. It felt like the ultimate betrayal of everything she had ever known, every oath she had ever sworn in the Chamber of Echoes. Yet, a small, persistent part of her, the part that resonated with Declan's weariness, the part touched by the insistent pull of the bond, whispered that this might be the first, terrifyingly necessary step towards saving them all from a threat they couldn't fight alone while simultaneously fighting each other. As she turned to leave, blending back into the shadows, a faint scent hit her on the barely stirring breeze, ozone and ancient forest, stronger than background trace. Declan, he was nearby, hidden, watching, ensuring her safety through the dangerous neutral zone. territory known for ambushes, or simply verifying she completed her part of their dangerous, unspoken bargain. She couldn't be sure. She didn't see him, didn't hear him, but the bond pulsed with his proximity. A silent, invisible acknowledgement passing between them in the darkness. A shared moment of precarious trust and mutual risk. She fled back towards Mooncrest territory, the conflicting feelings of being a traitor and, terrifyingly, a collaborator churning within her gut like poisoned river water, the weight of her decision heavy upon her. Thus began a tense, secret exchange over the next few weeks. Aurora would leave coded reports, findings from targeted scouting missions she subtly directed, always framing the intelligence as solely Mooncrest gathered, about suspected rogue activity, unusual scents near the mines, descriptions of strangely coordinated hunting patterns observed from afar, or suspicious signs like deliberately broken branches marking trails. A day or two later, adhering strictly to the lunar cycle timings they'd implicitly agreed upon, she would return under the cover of darkness or heavy morning mist to find a response tucked into the hollow oak, concise, factual reports from Declan's perspective, often confirming her findings with chillingly similar observations from his side, sometimes adding new details about specific attacks on his patrols near the mine entrances, or mapping suspected rogue travel routes between the disputed territories and the sprawling, hazardous abandoned mine complex. There were rudimentary maps scratched onto pieces of cured birch bark, showing recent ambush locations. Brief descriptions of rogue tactics, favoring overwhelming numbers and brutal, disabling attacks focusing on hamstrings or throats rather than strategic kills, often targeting weaker flanks or returning hunting parties laden with game. Worryingly, one of Declan's reports mentioned finding remnants of crude metal caltrops, clearly human-made, scattered on a trail after a skirmish. Slowly, cautiously, like piecing together a shattered mosaic in the dark. A clearer, more alarming picture began to emerge through their fragmented, secret communication. The rogues were indeed a separate, hostile entity, growing significantly in number and boldness. They seemed desperate, driven by hunger or exile from other territories, attacking indiscriminately for resources, food stores raided from both packs' hidden caches, basic weapons stolen from fallen warriors, even pelts stripped from victims. Yet their attacks showed increasing, disciplined coordination, suggesting ruthless, intelligent leadership emerging from the chaos. Declan's intelligence proved consistently accurate, matching her own scouts' findings when she subtly directed them to investigate specific areas based on his coded information, always careful never to reveal her source, attributing her insights to keen intuition or lucky guesses. Explanations that drew increasingly skeptical looks from Torvin and even quiet questioning from Fenrir. The fragile, secret alliance, born of mutual necessity and the undeniable, insistent pull of the bond, was working, providing vital, actionable intelligence neither pack could have gathered alone while blinded by their mutual animosity and pride. But the risk felt higher with every exchange, discovery feeling more and more inevitable. During their infrequent, brief meetings by the river, under the cover of darkness or dense fog, necessary now to discuss more complex findings or interpretations than coded scrolls allowed. Meetings they justified to themselves as essential for clarifying potentially life-saving intel. The conversations shifted subtly, becoming more than just tactical exchanges. They spoke less of the mechanics of the information exchange and more about the disturbing implications of what they were learning. The shared burden of leadership in the face of escalating danger. They seemed definitively led. Declan observed one damp, foggy night, his voice a low murmur that barely carried over the sound of dripping water from the willow branches overhead. They were closer this time, perhaps 20 feet apart on their respective banks, the thick fog providing a concealing shroud, blurring the hard line of the river, enhancing the sense of isolation, of being the only two souls aware of the full picture. The attacks show undeniable coordination, strategy beyond mere desperation or simple hunger. The ambush on my hunting party involved tactical use of terrain and communication signals. This isn't just a random band of starving exiles fighting independently. Someone is organizing them. Led by whom? Aurora asked, perched on a mossy rock on her side of the river, close enough now that she could see the lines of strain etched around his eyes in the faint moonlight filtering through the fog. The shared pressure palpable between them. The proximity made the bond hum, a low vibration that was both deeply unsettling and strangely grounding, a shared anchor in the overwhelming uncertainty. Have your scouts identified any potential leader, any distinguishing marks or sense? Not definitively identified, Declan admitted, frustration roughening his tone. Too much chaos in skirmishes, and they retreat fast into the mines. But survivors from the last ambush consistently described a large, heavily scar-faced wolf barking orders, matted gray fur, one eye milky white, vicious-looking, fought like a hardened veteran, not a desperate exile, skilled with a captured hunting spear. He looked directly at her, his amber eyes piercing the gloom, holding a significant weight, sharing restricted internal pack intelligence. My beta, Marcus, he is pragmatic, observant, also believes they are better armed than simple exiles should be. Some carry those crudely fashioned metal-tipped spears. Others wear reinforced leather armor, scavenged or crudely repaired. He suspects someone is supplying them, guiding them, someone who knows pack tactics, perhaps pack weaknesses, someone who benefits from destabilizing both our packs, keeping us focused entirely on each other while they grow stronger in the shadows, possibly carving out territory or weakening us for an external power. He paused, letting the chilling implication hang heavy in the damp air. Have you considered who in Mooncrest might resent your father's moderate rule, or your future ascension as Luna? Someone who might see opportunity in chaos, someone who clings desperately to the old ways of perpetual war, perhaps someone, he hesitated, connected to past leadership attempts. The question was blunt, bordering on accusatory, hitting uncomfortably close to home, especially considering Maeve's subtle undermining and Torvin's barely concealed ambition. Aurora bristled instinctively, offended by the implication of treason within her own loyal pack structure. But she knew he wasn't wrong to ask the hard question. Power dynamics existed in every pack, even Mooncrest, however much they prized unity. While her father was generally respected, his cautious approach, his quiet exploration of resource management over constant raiding after the losses at Stonefang Pass, sometimes drew sharp criticism from more aggressive factions, particularly those swayed by Maeve's traditionalist ideology or fueled by Torvin's burning, personal vendetta. There were always murmurs, old rivalries simmering beneath the surface of pack unity. Torvin was loyal, fiercely so in his own way. But sometimes his ambition felt sharp, his frustration with the stalemate palpable, his grief hardening into something dangerously inflexible and blinding. And Elder Maeve, a staunch traditionalist and powerful voice on the council, had openly questioned Kaelin's leadership after the last costly offensive failed years ago, arguing forcefully for a return to more aggressive tactics. Seeing Kaelin's caution as weakness, could Maeve's rigid traditionalism mask a deeper resentment, a willingness to deliberately destabilize Kaelin's leadership to regain influence or push the pack back towards conflict? Could Torvin's burning ambition and overwhelming grief blind him to the consequences of undermining Kaylin, or even herself. If he became convinced she was growing soft or somehow compromised by the enemy, the thought felt disloyal, paranoid, likely fueled by her own guilt over her secret dealings with Declan. But the possibility lingered, chillingly. There are always politics, Aurora admitted carefully, choosing her words with precision, unwilling to expose her pack's potential vulnerabilities without reciprocity, without more proof. Ambition exists. Differences in strategy are voiced openly in council. But outright treason, supplying rogues to attack our own, manipulating events to cause Mooncrest deaths. I find that hard to believe within Mooncrest. She turned the question back on him, unwilling to let him probe her pack's potential weaknesses without acknowledging his own rumored internal struggles. And you, does everyone in Shadow Ridge welcome your more efficient leadership? Your apparent focus on resources over constant raids seems a departure from Malachor and your father. I hear whispers that Elder Volkov preferred the old ways, the constant war footing, the relentless expansionism. Does he see opportunity in chaos? Could he be using the rogues to discredit you or force your hand? She remembered the persistent rumors of Declan's brutal rise to Alpha, the whispers of silenced dissent among the old guard, who favored constant warfare, and Malachor's aggressive legacy. Viewing Declan's pragmatic consolidation as a betrayal of Shadow Ridge strength, a muscle twitched violently in Declan's jaw, a flicker of controlled fury momentarily tightening his features, confirming her probe hit a nerve. My position was hard-won and remains contested by some, he stated flatly, his voice hardening, radiating cold authority. There are those within my council, like Elder Volkov, who yearn for the old ways, the simple brutality and constant war footing of my father and Malachor before him. My talk of efficiency and strategic consolidation sounds like weakness, even cowardice, to them. Volkov openly speaks of regaining Sunstone Valley as a matter of honor. He didn't elaborate on Volkov's potential actions, but the implication was chillingly clear. He faced significant internal opposition too. Factions who might benefit greatly from reigniting the war with Mooncrest at any cost, regardless of the rogue threat. Factions who might even see the rogues as a useful tool to destabilize his rule or provoke the conflict they craved. The scar on his jaw seemed to tighten, a stark reminder of the violence underpinning his own leadership. These clandestine meetings, shrouded in fog and secrecy, became more than just intelligence exchanges, stripped of their pack audience. Their Alpha and Luna masks slipped occasionally, revealing fleeting, vulnerable glimpses of the individuals beneath the fearsome reputations. The inherited mantles of leadership. Aurora saw facets of Declan she hadn't imagined, a sharp, strategic mind, capable of long-term planning that considered resource depletion and potential external threats, a dry, surprising wit that surfaced unexpectedly in moments of shared frustration over their respective pack's blind spots, the heavy burden of responsibility he carried for his pack's survival in a harsh, unforgiving territory, and a profound, bone-deep weariness with the endless cycle of violence he had inherited and was, perhaps, genuinely, desperately trying to break. He, in turn, seemed to see past her disciplined warrior facade to the thoughtful leader, grappling with an impossible destiny. The strategist weighing risk and duty, the female wrestling with a bond that defied logic and loyalty. The daughter struggling under the weight of her father's legacy and her pack's entrenched expectations. One night, discussing the challenges of convincing their elders, Aurora found herself admitting her fear of failing her mother's memory. Declan listened silently, his usual guarded expression softening slightly, and then shared a rare, stark glimpse of his own past, the immense pressure from Grok to be ruthless, the difficult choices he faced, challenging a father whose erratic cruelty threatened to destroy their pack from within, hinting at a past far more complex and perhaps tragic than the simple patricide Mooncrest rumors suggested. These shared moments of vulnerability, exchanged across the rushing water under the cloak of darkness, forged a tentative, dangerous understanding between them, an intimacy built on shared burdens rather than shared history. The mate bond deepened with each encounter, each shared confidence, each moment of grudging understanding, each shared danger from the rogues they secretly tracked. It was no longer just a physical pull or an intrusive empathic link. It was fostering a tentative, dangerous respect, an understanding that began to transcend pack loyalty and ingrained hatred, weaving invisible threads between them across the river. When their hands brushed accidentally while reaching simultaneously for a small, flat stone on the bank, Declan used to sketch a quick map of a recent rogue sighting near the mines. An electric jolt shot through Aurora, making her snatch her hand back as if burned, her cheeks flushing hotly in the darkness. She saw the answering flare of awareness, of raw, undisguised desire mixed with profound surprise and immediate self-recrimination in Declan's amber eyes before he ruthlessly masked it, his jaw tightening, turning his attention sharply back to the map, his voice slightly rougher as he continued explaining the terrain features. They were playing with fire, dancing on the crumbling edge of a precipice. Their secret alliance against the rogues was fragile, their growing emotional connection even more. So, a treacherous undercurrent threatening to pull them both under, drowning them in discovery and condemnation. Discovery felt less like a possibility and more like an inevitability, a shadow lurking just around the next bend in the path, sharpening its claws, waiting to strike, the breaking point. The moment the fuse finally reached the powder keg came with insidious timing during the week of the blood moon. It wasn't a literal name reflecting actual bloodshed, just a colloquial, superstitious one for the unsettling period around the lunar eclipse. When the moon, passing through the Earth's shadow, took on a strange, ominous reddish hue in the night sky. It was a period steeped in ancient werewolf lore and superstition, a time when pack senses were believed to be heightened. Primal instincts ran closer to the surface. Spiritual energy was potent and volatile, and old tensions often flared into open, unpredictable conflict. The very air felt thinner, charged with expectation and unease. The atmosphere in the den was already thick with anxiety due to the ongoing rogue threat. Minor skirmishes near the Gray Hills borders were increasing, the critical resource scarcity exacerbated by the recent fever's drain, and the insidious internal whispers amplified relentlessly by Maeve and her growing faction of traditionalists and frightened wolves. And then, a chilling report came from one of Aurora's most trusted scouts, Alara, who had been assigned a discreet watch near the Gray Hills border after the last shared intelligence drop. Luna. Alara reported breathlessly upon her swift return, her fur ruffled, eyes wide with urgency and confusion. I saw something near Black Creek, just beyond the agreed neutral zone markers. A Mooncrest warrior, heavily cloaked, meeting with someone. Couldn't get a clear scent or view. Too far, too much interfering wind near the cliffs. But they exchanged something. A small pouch. The Mooncrest wolf moved like Rorik from the Gloomwood party. But why would he be there, alone, meeting secretly? Rorik was known for his loyalty, but also for his family's historic rivalry with Kaelin's line. Generations ago, The report sent a jolt of icy dread through Aurora. Was this rogue contact or internal plotting? Another layer of conspiracy. Before she could fully process this disturbing new piece of the puzzle, catastrophe struck. The rogues, perhaps sensing this heightened vulnerability within Mooncrest, or perhaps deliberately directed by their unseen backers or internal collaborators like Rorik, to strike during a time of maximum potential chaos and superstition, chose this volatile blood moon night to launch their boldest, most devastating attack yet, not on a remote patrol or a vulnerable supply line miles away, but on the supposedly secure outskirts of the Mooncrest settlement itself, exploiting LAX security protocols caused by internal distractions, resource diversions towards the still recovering lower caves, and perhaps even deliberately weakened sentry posts assigned by Maeve citing routine rotation assignments. Kalen had approved without deep scrutiny amidst other pressures. They bypassed the main waterfall entrance sentries, using hidden, older, narrow tunnels near the seldom-used northern air shafts. Tunnels long thought collapsed, but perhaps recently reopened or mapped by someone with inside knowledge. They struck directly at the vulnerable flank containing the healer's den, and, unforgivably, the adjacent nursery caves were the pack's youngest. Most precious pups slept under the care of nursing mothers and elder caretakers. Piercing alarms shrieked through the Mooncrest caverns, the sharp, repeated, frantic howls reserved only for a direct assault on the den itself. A sound that chilled the blood, a sound not heard in living memory, echoing ominously off the stone. Warriors scrambled from their sleeping furs, weapons grabbed hastily, confusion momentarily reigning as the terrifying reality sunk in. Invasion. Kalen roared orders from the central chamber, trying desperately to establish defensive positions around the core living areas. His voice strained with disbelief and rising fury. Chaos erupted as the acrid, unfamiliar scent of strange, hostile wolves, dozens of them, far more than previously estimated, filled the inner sanctum, mingling sickeningly with the familiar smells of home, moss, and roasting meat. Aurora raced towards the nursery, raw, primal fear gripping her heart tighter than any enemy claw could possibly reach. The sounds reached her first, terrified pups squealing, mothers frantically trying to shield them with their own bodies, the savage snarls of the attackers punctuated by the sickening crunch of bone and screams of pain. Even before she burst into the wide cavern adjacent to the nurseries, she saw the horrifying scene. Several large, snarling rogues, their fur matted with filth and blood, their eyes gleaming with manic intensity and bloodlust, recognizable from scout descriptions, including the gray, one-eyed, scarred leader. Fangs himself had smashed through the woven willow branch barriers of the nursery entrance. They were deliberately targeting the pack's most vulnerable, their future, aiming to inflict maximum psychological damage alongside physical devastation. Aurora launched herself into the fray without hesitation, shifting midair, transforming into a silver fury dedicated solely, utterly, to defending the future of Mooncrest. She landed amidst the attackers, a whirlwind of claws and teeth, driving them back from the terrified pups with savage intensity, her Luna protectiveness overriding all else. She fought with the desperate strength of a mother, defending her own, knowing that the pack's continuity, its very soul, depended on protecting the next generation from this ultimate violation. Other loyal Mooncrest warriors, including Fenrir and Ilara, reached the scene moments later, grim-faced and furious, joining the desperate defense, forming a bristling wall of fur and fangs in front of the nursery entrance, holding the line against overwhelming numbers. Suddenly, cutting through the din of battle like a shard of ice. A chilling howl echoed from a high ledge overlooking the main cavern, Torvin's voice, amplified by the acoustics of the great cave, filled not with battle fury against the invaders, but with cold, righteous, venomous accusation that stopped Aurora's heart mid-beat. Treason! The Luna consorts with the enemy. I have seen it with my own eyes. The fighting faltered instantly, raggedly. Warriors, loyal Mooncrest defenders, and savage rogue attackers alike turned, stunned, towards the source of the incredible, shattering accusation. Aurora froze, mid-lunge at a rogue attacker trying to flank Alara's desperate defense near the nursery entrance, her blood running cold as ice water, the strength draining from her limbs. Exposed. It wasn't just an attack. This was the trap. The poisonous net Maeve and Torvin had been weaving had finally closed. Torvin stood on the high ledge, elder Maeve positioned grimly, almost triumphantly. Beside him, her face a mask of righteous vindication. He deliberately held up his arm, still faintly marked from a poorly healed wound he claimed came from a Shadow Ridge skirmish weeks ago, though Aurora now suspected differently, adding a visual element of pathos, of a loyal warrior wounded while his Luna supposedly plotted. "I saw them," he roared, his voice ringing with conviction, amplified by his perceived pain and righteous fury, cutting through the battle sounds. Together, in the secret shadows of the gray hills, under the dark moon, exchanging tokens, plotting, whispering like lovers. While rogues bleed us dry and attack our very homes, our Luna shares secrets and warmth with the Shadow Ridge Alpha, the butcher himself. Declan, denial, shocked outrage, and dawning. Horrified confusion rippled through the assembled Mooncrest warriors like a physical shockwave. Some stared at Aurora with utter disbelief, unable to reconcile the monstrous accusation with the dedicated Luna they knew. The leader who had just risked everything in the Gloomwood, who fought now like a demon to protect their pups. Others, however, their minds already poisoned by weeks of whispers about Aurora's distraction, her softness, her strange decisions regarding patrols near the Grey Hills. Their fear amplified by the current bloody invasion, looked at her with growing suspicion and open hostility. They saw her brief hesitation, misinterpreted her shock as guilt. Her father, Kalen, visible near the command center amidst the chaos, coordinating defenses against a different rogue group trying to penetrate deeper, looked utterly polyaxed, his face paling dramatically beneath his gray fur, his eyes filled with a devastating mixture of shock, disbelief, and unbearable pain directed towards her across the chaotic cavern. "It's not what you think," Aurora shouted, desperately shifting back to human form amidst the chaos, needing her human voice, needing to project authority, trying frantically to regain control of the spiraling, catastrophic situation. "We were gathering intelligence on the Rugas. This invasion proves Declan was right. He fights the rogues too. He seeks to stop them. They attack his pack as well. Warned us." Maeve scoffed from the ledge, her voice ringing with ancient scorn, dripping venom that poisoned the very air, cutting through Aurora's desperate explanation. Or directed the attack himself, using you as his easily manipulated pawn, his willing collaborator. Perhaps this rogue leader Fangs reports to Declan. "You are blinded, girl, blinded by his manipulations, his dark power. Perhaps even," she paused dramatically, letting the ultimate, forbidden word hang heavy in the suddenly silent, stunned cavern, confirming the darkest taboo by the forbidden darkness of a mate bond. A collective gasp, sharp and horrified, ripped through the assembled Mooncrest wolves. The ultimate taboo, the unthinkable betrayal, mated to the enemy Alpha. Horror, disgust, and raw fear warred on the faces staring up at her, their expressions shifting rapidly from confusion to condemnation under Maeve's certain pronouncement. Even Fenrir looked momentarily stunned, his unwavering loyalty faltering. "She bears his scent," Torvin added furiously, pointing an accusatory finger directly at Aurora across the cavern, his own senses likely heightened by the blood moon's influence and his obsessive focus, his grief twisting into certainty. Faintly, cleverly hidden perhaps by herbs or deceptive magic, but it's there for any true wolf to smell. The scent of Shadow Ridge, of Alpha Declan himself. She is compromised, tainted, unfit to lead, unfit to be Mooncrest. She has brought this destruction upon us. Aurora felt trapped, utterly exposed, her worst fears realized in the most public, damaging way imaginable. The bond, her secret lifeline, and her unbearable curse was now laid bare, twisted into an accusation of ultimate betrayal before her entire pack. During a direct assault on their home, their sanctuary, she looked at her packmates, warriors she had trained with, bled with, laughed with, and saw suspicion, anger, and raw fear replacing trust and loyalty in too many eyes. She looked towards her father and saw profound disappointment and unbearable pain etched onto his aging face, a look that wounded her more deeply than any physical blow could. Her carefully constructed world, her identity, shattered around her. The rogues, led by the cunning Fangs who clearly understood the devastating impact of the internal implosion, seized the opportunity with animal cunning. Sensing the defenders' sudden confusion and critical, fatal division, they renewed their attack with savage intensity, howling in triumph as they surged forward into the widening gaps in the defense. Chaos engulfed the cavern again, but this time, the Mooncrest defense was fatally fractured, undermined from within by Torvin's devastating revelation and Maeve's poisonous, manipulative words echoing from the ledge. Aurora found herself terrifyingly isolated, caught between the snarling jaws of the attacking rogues pressing relentlessly towards the vulnerable nursery entrance and the suspicious, hostile glares of a significant portion of her own pack, who now seemed unsure whether to fight the invaders or restrain her. Torvin and Maeve had chosen their moment with diabolical precision, using the panic and chaos of the attack to turn her own people against her, leveraging generations of hatred against the impossible truth of the bond, twisting her attempts to save them into the cause of their potential destruction. Her secret alliance, her cautious attempts to navigate a path towards peace, her undeniable, unwanted bond with Declan, it had all culminated in this unmitigated disaster. She stood accused of treason. Her pack was under direct attack within their supposedly secure den, and the enemy Alpha she was supposedly consorting with, the only one who might corroborate her story, was miles away across the river, unaware of the catastrophe unfolding. She felt utterly, terrifyingly alone, the weight of betrayal pressing down on her as heavily as the imminent threat of the rogue claws tearing at the heart of her home. The fuse, lit weeks ago at the Sunken Falls, had finally reached the powder keg. The explosion was devastating, tearing her world, and potentially her pack, apart. This was her lowest point, abandoned, accused, and facing overwhelming odds. Her choices leading seemingly to ruin. The main cavern descended into brutal, fragmented chaos. Rogues, emboldened by the defenders' disarray and clearly directed by Fangs with terrifying precision, surged forward, their savage howls echoing hideously off the stone walls, mingling with the cries of injured Mooncrest warriors and the terrified whimpers spilling from the poorly defended nursery. Warriors loyal to Kaelin and Aurora fought back with desperate fierceness, forming pockets of resistance, particularly Fenrir and Alara, holding a frantic line near the nursery entrance. But others hesitated, their movements fatally hampered by doubt and Maeve's continued shouts from above. They glanced uncertainly between their accused Luna, fighting like a cornered lioness against both rogues and suspicion, and the furious, accusing Torvin still perched on the ledge like a prophet of doom, his words continuing to poison the air. Maeve continued her poisonous commentary, shouting about purification, about the need to cast out the tainted Luna to appease the moon goddess and restore pack unity, further fanning the flames of fear and division. Her words like acid dissolving the pack's cohesion, deliberately undermining Kaelin's attempts to restore order. Some warriors visibly lowered their weapons, looking lost and uncertain who to fight. Aurora fought with the focused ferocity of the cornered and the utterly betrayed, desperately defending the widened breach near the nursery entrance while her mind raced, searching frantically for a way out of this inescapable nightmare. Torvin's accusation, Maeve's manipulation, it was too perfectly timed with the rogue assault through the supposedly collapsed tunnels. Alara's earlier report about Rorik flashed through her mind. Had he provided the route? Were they collaborating? How could she prove her innocence amidst the bloodshed and accusations? How could she rally her pack to defend their home when half of them now saw her as the primary threat? The source of their vulnerability, tainted by the enemy. Kaelin, shaking off his initial, paralyzing shock and heartbreak, roared for order, his alpha power flaring like a physical force, trying desperately to redirect the pack's focus back to the immediate invaders. Focus on the enemy! Defend the den! Settle internal matters later! Protect the pups! Form ranks! But his authority, usually absolute, was tragically weakened, undermined by the insidious seed of doubt Torvin had so effectively planted, amplified by Maeve's venomous pronouncements and the deeply ingrained fear of the Shadow Ridge, now personalized onto Aurora herself. Loyalty fractured visibly along lines of fear, tradition, personal allegiance, and raw panic. Suddenly, Torvin, his eyes blazing with a fanaticism that transcended mere suspicion into outright madness fueled by grief and Maeve's manipulations, leaped down from the ledge. He landed heavily, ignoring the rogues swarming nearby, his focus utterly fixed. He lunged directly, with shocking speed and deadly intent, not at an invader, but at Aurora. Traitor! He snarled, his fangs bared, grief and rage contorting his features into a mask of hate as he launched a powerful, slashing attack aimed directly at her throat. You endanger us all with your weakness, your corruption. Your cursed bond with him defiles us. You must be purged. Aurora, momentarily distracted by a rogue feint near the nursery entrance where Alara was desperately holding off two attackers, barely managed to parry his unexpected, treacherous assault, shocked to her core by his direct attack on her during a den invasion. This was not just accusation. This was attempted murder, high treason fueled by madness. Torvin, stop this madness. The rogues are inside. Fangs is targeting the children. We must stand together, she yelled, sidestepping another vicious blow that tore through her tunic sleeve, the fabric ripping loudly. You are the madness, he retorted, pressing his attack relentlessly, blinded by his conviction, deliberately forcing her away from the nursery entrance, creating an even wider gap in the already crumbling defenses. A few warriors loyal to him, mostly younger hotheads influenced by his charisma, his potent grief narrative, or Maeve's traditionalist rhetoric, moved hesitantly to support him, effectively blocking other Mooncrest loyalists, like Fenrir, who tried desperately to intervene and pull Torvin back. Protect the pack from the real threat, one of Torvin's followers snarled at Fenrir. The pack was now actively fighting amongst itself, loyalist against factionist, even as rogues poured deeper into the cavern, their howls triumphant. Fangs urging them towards the unprotected nursery. It was an unmitigated disaster, a nightmare realized. Aurora realized with sickening horror that this was exactly what Fangs, or whoever now led the rogues and their shadowy backers humans, Volkov must have wanted. The great Mooncrest pack, renowned for its unity and resilience, tearing itself apart from within, ripe for destruction, primed for annihilation. Maeve and Torvin, in their blind hatred and ambition, had become unwitting pawns in a much larger, more sinister game, sacrificing their own pack for the sake of tradition and vengeance. And then, a sound ripped through the chaos, a sound of pure, unadulterated alpha fury that momentarily silenced even the din of battle, vibrating through the very stone beneath their paws, making the air tremble. A thunderous battle roar echoed from the main tunnel entrance, amplified by the waterfall outside, a sound that resonated deep in Aurora's bones, instantly, terrifyingly recognizable through the bond, sending a jolt of terror and impossible hope through her. Declan. He exploded into the cavern like a force of nature unleashed, not with a small, stealthy intervention force like she vaguely sensed he might have employed before, but at the head of a full, disciplined war party, at least 20 of Shadow Ridge's elite warriors, moving with terrifying speed and brutal, coordinated efficiency, their dark pelts a stark contrast to Mooncrest's silver and gray, their amber eyes burning with focused rage. They slammed into the main body of the astonished rogues near the cavern entrance like a dark, unstoppable tide meeting a ragged, chaotic shore, their disciplined attack formations cutting through the surprised rogue ranks with devastating effect. Marcus, Declan's pragmatic beta, was at his side, directing their forces with sharp efficiency. But they didn't stop there. Declan's burning amber gaze swept the cavern in an instant, taking in the fractured fighting, the horrifying sight of Mooncrest wolves battling each other near the nursery, and instantly locked onto the sight of Torvin relentlessly attacking Aurora. Forcing her back, step by step, he didn't hesitate, with a roar that promised swift and terrible retribution, shaking the very foundations of the den, shaking dust from the high ceiling. He changed trajectory, bypassing several snarling rogues who tried to block him, and launched himself like a black thunderbolt directly at Torvin. "Declan, no!" Aurora screamed, horrified beyond measure, shifting back to wolf form instinctively as if to intercept him, the political implications warring with the immediate danger to herself. Shadow Ridge attacking Mooncrest warriors, even treacherous ones, within the sacred Mooncrest den. This would ignite all-out, irrevocable war, erasing any faint hope of peace forever. This was the final catastrophe, the ultimate violation. Kaelin roared her name in warning. But Declan wasn't attacking indiscriminately with lethal intent towards Torvin. Despite his palpable fury, he slammed into Torvin with the calculated force of a battering ram, bowling him over before Torvin could react, sending him crashing hard against the cavern wall with a sickening thud that knocked the wind out of him and likely cracked ribs. Declan landed atop him, pinning him easily despite Torvin's enraged struggles, his powerful jaws snapping shut inches from Torvin's exposed throat, a low, terrifying growl vibrating through the cavern, freezing everyone nearby, Mooncrest, Shadow Ridge, and Rogue alike, into momentary, shocked stillness. "Leave her alone." The words were guttural, vibrating with raw, undeniable possessive rage, amplified by the bond. a declaration that stunned everyone. Simultaneously, several of Declan's elite warriors, including his pragmatic beta Marcus, moved with calculated, non-lethal precision to swiftly disarm and subdue Torvin's few active supporters, using disabling holds and pressure points, rather than lethal force. Their movements fluid and disciplined, clearly following predetermined protocols for minimizing Mooncrest casualties, unless absolutely necessary to protect Aurora or themselves. Their chilling efficiency spoke volumes about Declan's orders. The sudden, decisive, and unexpectedly targeted intervention shifted the balance of the entire conflict instantly. The rogues, now facing a suddenly unified, albeit shocked and deeply uneasy, front composed of Mooncrest loyalists and the formidable Shadow Ridge war party who had appeared as if from nowhere, faltered. Their attack lost all momentum, their coordination shattering under the unexpected, disciplined onslaught. Declan, ignoring the stunned and struggling Torvin beneath his paws for a crucial moment, turned his immediate attention back to the primary invaders, coordinating his warriors with sharp, barked commands that resonated with absolute authority. His warriors seamlessly, almost instinctively, integrated their attacks with Kaelin's loyalists, who, after a heart-stopping moment of stunned confusion, recognized the immediate threat remained the rogues who were still trying to fight, still menacing the nursery. Kaelin gave a sharp nod, accepting the unthinkable alliance out of sheer necessity. Aurora, freed from Torvin's dangerous distraction, threw herself back into the fight against the remaining rogues, attempting to breach the nursery area, finding herself coordinating defensive maneuvers with both loyal Mooncrest warriors like Ilara and Fenrir, and, unbelievably, two dark-furred Shadow Ridge fighters who responded instantly to her directions, as if she were their own Luna, their actions guided by Declan's clear, overriding focus on protecting that specific area above all else. The mate bond blazed between her and Declan across the chaotic cavern, no longer hidden, no longer resisted, but a raw, open channel of shared purpose, fierce protective instinct, and desperate, synchronized determination. In that moment, standing amidst the wreckage of her reputation, fighting shoulder to shoulder with her pack's sworn enemy to save her home, Aurora knew with chilling certainty that there was no going back. Her fate, her pack's fate, was now inextricably, publicly, irrevocably linked with Declan's. The battle against the rogues turned swiftly, decisively after that, outnumbered, outmaneuvered, facing two packs fighting with unexpected, desperate synergy under unified, if unconventional command, and thoroughly demoralized by the ferocity of Declan's defense. The appearance of the Shadow Ridge force, and the collapse of their internal Mooncrest collaborators, the remaining invaders broke and fled back towards the hidden tunnels they had used to enter. Fangs, the scarred leader, seeing his plan utterly fail, snarled a final curse before disappearing into the darkness, pursued relentlessly by warriors from both packs, led by a determined Fenrir and Marcus, eager to drive the threat completely out of the den and perhaps capture the leader, a spontaneous joint action born of shared relief and lingering adrenaline. Weeks later, after the immediate aftermath settled, after Torvin and Maeve were exiled, after fragile trust began to be forged in joint council meetings, the time came for the final reckoning. The combined forces of Mooncrest and Shadow Ridge, operating under the unprecedented joint command of Aurora and Declan, moved into the treacherous Grey Hills to assault the rogue stronghold in the abandoned mines. Their scouts, Ilara and Marcus working in unsettlingly efficient tandem, had confirmed Fangs and his core group, potentially numbering 50 or 60 hardened rogues, were deeply entrenched. The initial assault was met with fierce resistance. The rogues, led by Fangs, who proved sickeningly familiar with the mine's layout, used the collapsing tunnels and shadowed alcoves to their advantage, launching brutal ambushes. They triggered rockfalls, used narrow shafts for choke points, and deployed more disturbingly human tools, blinding powders, snares, and even small, crude explosive charges that reeked of human chemicals, wounding several warriors and confirming Declan and Aurora's suspicions of outside aid. The battle devolved into a series of running fights through the dusty, echoing darkness. Aurora, Declan, Marcus, and Fenrir led spearhead groups, clearing tunnels section by section. The air grew thick with dust, blood scent, and the acrid tang of explosives. The mate bond was a blazing beacon between Aurora and Declan, allowing them to coordinate movements non-verbally across different tunnels, anticipating each other's needs, warning of unseen dangers. Several times, Aurora felt a jolt through the bond, alerting her to a hidden rogue just before they struck, saving her or nearby warriors. Declan seemed to react similarly, pivoting unexpectedly to counter a threat near her position just moments before it manifested. They cornered the main body of rogues, including Fangs, in the mine's largest central cavern, a vast, dilapidated space littered with rusting human ore carts and collapsing timber supports. But as the final battle erupted, a new, unexpected betrayal occurred. Elder Volkov, who had grudgingly joined the assault ostensibly to monitor Declan's leadership, suddenly attacked Declan from behind amidst the chaos, his face contorted in a snarl of triumphant hatred. Shadow Ridge follows strength, not weakness bound to a mooncrest whore, he roared, lunging with a wickedly sharp obsidian dagger aimed at Declan's exposed back as Declan engaged Fangs. Declan! Marcus roared a split second before Volkov struck, acting purely on instinct and unwavering loyalty. Marcus threw himself between Volkov and his alpha. Volkov's dagger sank deep into Marcus's shoulder, but Marcus, grimacing through the pain, used the momentum to tackle Volkov hard, driving him away from Declan. A furious, short, brutal fight ensued between the two Shadow Ridge wolves, ending abruptly when Marcus, protecting his alpha, delivered a fatal blow to the treasonous elder. Volkov fell, his eyes wide with shocked disbelief. Amidst the chaos of the larger battle, the betrayal was internal too, Aurora realized with chilling clarity, understanding the full extent of the forces arrayed against peace. Enraged by Volkov's treachery and Marcus's injury, Declan turned his full, focused fury onto Fangs. The rogue leader was strong, brutally scarred, and fought with the desperate savagery of the truly hateful, using a modified human pickaxe with vicious skill. The fight was short but incredibly violent. Declan, embodying the raw power of his lineage combined with disciplined skill, overwhelmed Fangs, shattering his weapon, breaking his defenses, and finally ending his reign of terror with a swift, decisive finality, his lifeless body collapsing amongst the ruins of human exploitation, silencing the rogue command structure. With their leader Fangs defeated by Declan and the traitor Volkov dispatched by Marcus, and their escape routes cut off by Aurora, Fenrir, Ilara and the combined warriors systematically eliminating the remaining rogue fighters. The rest of the rogues lost all heart. Some surrendered, others scattered futilely into the deepest, unexplored tunnels, likely to perish in the darkness. The rogue threat, the catalyst for so much pain and ultimately so much change, was finally, definitively neutralized. The final, intense climax had purged both external and internal threats. Standing together in the dusty, torch-lit cavern after the battle, surrounded by the weary but relieved warriors of both packs mingling naturally in the aftermath, sharing water skins and tending to minor injuries without regard for old pack lines. Declan turned to the wounded Marcus, gripping his uninjured shoulder firmly. "You saved my life, old friend. Shadow Ridge owes you a debt." Marcus merely nodded, grimacing slightly, his duty done. Declan then moved to Aurora's side, his gaze intense. He reached out and gently, possessively, brushed a streak of grime and rogue blood from her cheek, his calloused fingers sending shivers down her spine despite the grim circumstances. The unexpected tenderness, a stark contrast to the violence just witnessed. "Are you unharmed?" he asked, his voice low, intensely focused, meant only for her amidst the watching crowd. The concern in his amber eyes raw and genuine, deeper than Alpha authority. "Yes," she whispered, looking up into his burning eyes, seeing the genuine relief beneath the fierce Alpha facade, the concern warring with the possessive anger he still felt towards the memory of Torvin's attack. "Thanks to you and Marcus." She glanced towards the loyal beta being tended by healers from both packs. The admission felt simple, true, inevitable. This time, Declan didn't hesitate. Before the watchful eyes of all their warriors, survivors of a hard-won, costly shared victory, he reached down and took her hand. Aurora didn't pull away. She laced her fingers firmly through his. A simple, public gesture that sealed their connection, acknowledging the bond and its profound implications for all to see. A tentative cheer went up, starting among the younger warriors like Alara and Kyle, less steeped in the old hatreds, then spreading hesitantly, then more strongly, through the ranks as they looked at their leaders, standing united amidst the carnage, hand in hand. They had fought together. They had won. Together, a new era had dawned in the smoky darkness of the mine, built on shed blood, exposed betrayal, and unexpected connection. The decisive victory against the common enemy, and the purging of traitors within both packs, paved the way for something more permanent than a temporary military alliance. The shared sacrifice, the proven effectiveness of cooperation, and the undeniable reality of the bond between their leaders created momentum for lasting change. Returning to the surface, blinking in the unfamiliar sunlight, they brought back not just victory, but the framework for a formal treaty of peace and unification between Mooncrest and Shadow Ridge. The journey wasn't easy. The formal treaty council meeting, held weeks later near the symbolic lightning-struck oak, was fraught. Centuries of deeply ingrained mistrust and hatred didn't vanish overnight. Old grievances were aired like festering wounds. Bitter accusations occasionally flared like embers rekindled by surviving hardliners. Integrating pack traditions, laws, and social structures was a complex, ongoing negotiation requiring immense patience, difficult compromises, and constant reinforcement from the leadership. Establishing shared hunting grounds in formerly disputed zones, like Sunstone Valley, required careful management to avoid friction. Some older warriors on both sides remained skeptical, watching each other with wary eyes. However, the undeniable bond between Aurora and Declan served as a powerful, constant anchor. Warriors witnessing their Alpha and Luna consulting each other with clear mutual respect, planning joint strategies with shared insight born of both logic and the bond's connection, and occasionally displaying unguarded moments of quiet understanding or shared dry humor amidst the tensions, slowly began to lower their own walls. Declan's fierce, open protectiveness of Aurora continued to challenge the Shadow Ridge savage narrative. Aurora's unwavering loyalty to Mooncrest principles, even while embracing her bond, reassured her pack. Cautious friendships bloomed between younger warriors like Alara and some of Declan's less traditional fighters during joint patrols guarding against the remaining, albeit reduced, human encroachment threats from the south. A final, subtle twist emerged from deciphered texts found in the ruins of Fang's command center in the mines, fragments suggesting Fang's, fueled by deep personal hatred for both packs, after being exiled decades prior for betraying sacred hunting laws, had allied himself not just with opportunistic humans, but had also sought out ancient, dangerous lore. He had found whispers of manipulating dormant ley lines near the sunken falls, hoping to unleash chaotic energy to weaken both packs during the blood moon, potentially exacerbating aggression and distrust. Had this inadvertently amplified or even triggered the dormant mate bond between Aurora and Declan when they stood there? Or was it merely the goddess's timing? The question lingered, unanswerable. Aurora and Declan discussed it privately one night under the stars. "Does it matter how the bond awoke?" Declan asked quietly, his hand finding hers. "Or does it matter what we choose to do with it now?" Aurora met his gaze, seeing the unwavering choice in his eyes reflecting her own. The origin was irrelevant. Their shared future, their commitment, was their own conscious decision. Kalen, seeing the strength of the new alliance, the genuine partnership between his daughter and the Shadow Ridge Alpha, and recognizing the dawn of a new era that required unified leadership, untainted by the deepest scars of the past war, eventually made the difficult but necessary decision to step down, with grace and wisdom, supported by a recovering Marcus and a supportive Fenrir. He passed the mantle of Alpha not just to Aurora, but jointly to her and Declan, ensuring the unity was embodied at the very highest level, preventing any lingering sense of one pack dominating the other. His final act as Alpha was one of profound trust and hope for the future he wouldn't have dreamed possible a year prior. In a grand, unprecedented ceremony held in the Moon Meadow, a sacred neutral ground bathed in the soft, silvery light of a full, clear moon, attended by members of both packs standing shoulder to shoulder, a sea of silver gray, black, and russet fur blending together under the ancient trees. Aurora and Declan formally accepted the mantle of leadership, not as Alpha of one pack and Luna of the other, but as joint Alphas, ruling side by side, equals bound by destiny and fierce determination, symbolizing the true, profound unification of their people into a single, stronger entity. Dressed in ceremonial pelts, adorned with newly designed symbols combining both moon crest, a silver crescent moon, intertwined with mountain peaks, and Shadow Ridge, an obsidian wolf head silhouette against a stylized river pattern. They exchanged vows, not just as mates accepting the goddess's often incomprehensible will, but as leaders pledging their lives, their loyalty, and their combined strength to the well-being and future of their now united pack, the United Ridge Pack. Ancient songs of both traditions were sung, weaving together in surprisingly harmonious ways, echoing through the peaceful night. Fires representing both packs were ceremonially joined into one large, crackling bonfire, its light reaching towards the starry sky, a beacon of unity and shared warmth against the lingering shadows of the past. Aurora stood beside Declan, her hand held firmly, confidently, in his, looking out at the mingled sea of faces, familiar moon crest, silver fur, beside once feared but no longer hostile Shadow Ridge black and russet. The fear, the horror, the revulsion she had felt upon discovering their bond at the sunken falls seemed like a distant, faded nightmare, a necessary crucible they had passed through together. That bond, initially perceived as a devastating curse, a cruel jest of fate, had forced them both to look beyond prejudice, to question generations of ingrained hatred, to take terrifying risks, and ultimately, to forge a difficult but desperately needed path to peace. It had brought them together, not just as mates destined by the goddess, but as leaders capable of ending a centuries-long war that had threatened to consume them all. A pup with mooncrest silver fur tumbled playfully, with a pup bearing Shadow Ridge darkness near the edge of the clearing. Their innocent laughter, a counterpoint to the solemn ceremony, a promise of the future. Their forbidden love, born amidst the fires of conflict, tested by betrayal both internal and external, and ultimately embraced before their people, became a legend whispered through the ancient forest, a testament to the enduring power of connection over division, understanding over hatred, courage over fear. Under their joint rule, the brutal cycle of violence that had defined their ancestors' lives was finally, decisively broken. Pups from both lineages grew up together, playing beneath the ancient trees, learning stories not just of past wars and fallen heroes, but of the hard-won peace, of the Alpha and Luna, whose impossible bond had united two packs against all odds and secured a future where the swift river ran clear and untainted, no longer stained by the blood of kin, but reflecting the bright promise of unity. The ancient forest, for the first time in generations, knew a measure of true tranquility, guarded not by suspicion and hostility, but by the combined strength and shared purpose of the United Ridge Pack, led by the Luna, who found her destiny, her strength, and her love in the heart of her enemy, and the Alpha, who chose peace over power, partnership over dominance, love over war. Their connection, forged in conflict, tested by betrayal, and ultimately embraced as a gift, became the enduring heart of their people, a powerful, living symbol of hope, unity, and a lasting, peaceful future under the watchful eye of the moon goddess who had, perhaps, in her infinite, inscrutable wisdom, known the path all along. Whisper Ridge finally lived up to its name, carrying only the peaceful sounds of the wind and a united pack thriving below.